door, and I'll call upon the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is my honour to rise in the House today to offer a resolution of sympathy upon the demise of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip. And I move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Third Party, the following resolution. Be it resolved that the following humble address be presented to Her Majesty the Queen, expressing the heartfelt sympathy of this House on the death of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. To the Queen's most excellent Majesty, most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most loyal and dutiful subjects, the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island, in session assembled, humbly beg leave to approach Your Majesty to express the profound sorrow felt by this House and by the loyal people of this province with Your Majesty and all the members of the royal family at this irreparable loss sustained by you and them in the death of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. As the loving and beloved husband of Your Majesty, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, will always be held in respectful and grateful remembrance by people throughout the Commonwealth and all of those who mourn his loss worldwide. We tender our sincere sympathy and heartfelt condolences. We pray that Almighty God may abundantly comfort Your Majesty and the royal family in your poignant grief. Be it further resolved that the address be engrossed and sent to the Governor-General of Canada to be forwarded to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. And Mr. Speaker, I just had a few comments that I would like to make. That first of all, I rise and offer my deepest sympathy and condolences to Her Majesty the Queen on the passing of His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Edward Island has a long history with His Royal Highness, and during his long tenure in public life, he was witness to several important milestones in the life of our province, dating back to their first visit to Prince Edward Island in 1951. In 1959, the royal couple returned to Prince Edward Island as part of the Royal Tour of Canada. That visit included tours of local farms and businesses, including one to the Prowse Farm in the Brackley area, Mr. Speaker, in the district that I now represent, and they took in an exciting night of harness racing. They returned again in 1964 and attended the official opening, Mr. Speaker, of the new Confederation Centre of the Arts just steps from this chamber. In 1973, the royal couple once again came to Prince Edward Island to join in our centennial celebrations. Mr. Speaker, Prince Philip's impact on Prince Edward Island went beyond visits. For more than 6 decades, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards have helped support the development and growth of island youth. Through his years of service and patronage to the World Wildlife Fund, he helped place issues of conservation, biodiversity, and sustainability in the thoughts, actions, and conversations of millions. Over his long life, Prince Philip served his duties in many ways, but perhaps none was more significant than as the loving partner of Her Majesty the Queen for almost 75 years. I am reminded, Mr. Speaker, that despite Prince Philip's lifetime of accomplishments and accolades, that above all he was a veteran, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. And we honor that loss that his family and loved ones feel. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government of Prince Edward Island, let me extend our deepest sympathies and condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and the family of Prince Philip on his passing. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd first like to thank the Premier for his eloquent words and for the resolution of sympathy for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Prince Philip led a long and full life in the most public and scrutinised of circumstances, and he carried out those duties over more than 6 decades with poise and humour. Within the restrictions of his role and his life, he was an independent man with a mind of his own and clearly a very distinct personality. The Prince Philip leaves many lasting legacies, as the Premier just described, and closest to my heart is indeed those Duke of Edinburgh Awards that the Premier mentioned. They're rewards that recognise and represent a learning programme that happens outside of formal academia and that allows youth from all backgrounds to pursue study in an area of their choice that they are particularly passionate about. And it's a form of education that speaks to the individual needs and styles of each unique person. And and it's often most focused on personal development and health and wellness and learning in the truest, broadest sense. The end goal is to equip and empower young people to build the skills and the confidence and the resilience that we all need to live our best lives. And like many others in this House, I've heard moving stories from many young people, young Islanders, young Canadians, and young people around the world over the course of the last week whose lives were transformed by their participation in the Duke of Edinburgh Award programme. On the day of the Prince's funeral, which was predictably beautiful, particularly the music from that service, and also for me it was strangely intimate because so much of the world was, of course, watching what was going on. On that same day, a picture was released by Her Majesty the Queen, and it was taken on top of one of those classic Scottish mountains, and it captured what, in that moment, looked like nothing more than a supremely relaxed and happy, ordinary couple. And I found that photograph quite haunting and quite poignant, because I doubt that they felt that way very often, that ease and carefree looseness that that picture captured. So on behalf of the official opposition, I too want to pass on my condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and indeed the entire royal family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the passing of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, was a matter of real sadness for many Islanders and people around the world. Many Islanders maintain deep ties to the monarchy, and the death of Prince Philip represents the conclusion of a long relationship he had with our province. I know that many Islanders had the opportunity to meet the Prince, and I also know these individuals cherish those memories and will pass them on to their children and grandchildren. In conclusion, I want to echo our province's condolences to the royal family and wish them well during this difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just rise today to talk about April 18th to 24th being National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week in Canada. And I think it's an important topic that I've been passionate about, and I'd like to see that.
Honourable Member?
Yeah.
Are you talking to the motion?
No.
Oh,
Oh, is it a motion? Okay.
this is the motion. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the motion? Shall it carry? The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Third Party, the following resolution of sympathy. Whereas Mr. Ross Young, a former member of the Legislative Assembly for First Kings from 1991 to 1996, passed away on April 9th, 2021. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize the contributions made by the late member, Mr. Ross Young, to this province. I have a few remarks as well, Mr. Speaker.
Oh,
That's
okay, yes.
sure. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that we rise today and speak to these motions of condolence and resolutions of sympathy. Ross Young was a person, Mr. Speaker, who left a lasting mark on people he crossed paths with in his life. I knew him as a colleague and a friend. Mr. Speaker, he was an MLA, coach in minor sports, an active member of his community, and no matter what hat he seemed to wear, Ross made his mark, Mr. Speaker. And I have been reflecting quite a bit in the last few days since I've heard the news of Ross's passing. And, you know, I think that one of the things I keep coming back to in the privilege that has been my life, I feel I've had a front row seat to much of the life of Ross and his accomplishments that he's made. I remember him first as a football player with the Mount Allison Mounties, Mr. Speaker, and I remember him as a hockey player, combative as all get out. One of those guys you'd love on your team. Wouldn't be so happy to play against, Mr. Speaker. And I also think of his accomplishments as an elected member. We sit in this House today representing single-member districts. And that is because of a bill that Ross introduced in 1996 to end the practice of having dual member ridings on Prince Edward Island. And he and I would often joke, Mr. Speaker, that He was stabbed with his own sword. He lost the next election in the single riding, Mr. Speaker, his own political sword, and he laughed at that, and as he often did. And I remember him as a young reporter. He was elected to represent First Kings, the area which you currently represent, Mr. Speaker, in a by-election in 1991, following the passing of his father, Ross Johnny Young. As I say, during his time as an MLA, Ross served on the Election Act and Electoral Boundaries Commission, and also influenced some of the legislative reforms that he later championed and that still guide us today. To say, I knew him for many years. I knew him as a friend. We shared a love of sports, a love of politics. He was a gifted storyteller, Mr. Speaker, and I know many of my colleagues in here poke a little fun at me from time to time about my own storytelling background, and I always take that as a term of endearment, Mr. Speaker, because where I come from, where Ross came from, where you come from, storytelling was sometimes the only currency you had, and it was a way for Ross especially, to connect him with his constituents in a way that some MLAs could only wish, to be truthful, Mr. Speaker. He was an amazing storyteller. He was fun to be around. I watched with pride and admiration and with my pencil as a reporter as he spearheaded the re-establishment of minor football in Kings County, Mr. Speaker, and built a franchise with the Surrey Wildcats that was a champion franchise for many, many years, long beyond Ross's tenure with the club. And not only did he bring championships to that area, but I think he influenced youth in such a way, Mr. Speaker, that that positive nature of that influence is felt today. When a friend or loved one leaves us, Mr. Speaker, it's painful, especially when they leave us far too soon, like Ross did. But as we honor and remember, we're reminded of the moments that made our relationship special, the times that we shared, Mr. Speaker, and within our grief, I hope we can find some time to find a smile and some joy, because that's what Ross would be most proud of, I'm sure. And those are the moments that he would be most proud of and that remind us of him. I just wanted to say to his mom, Helen, to Mary, to Laura, to John Ross, and to Jay, I want to extend my heartfelt sympathies to them on this difficult loss, Mr. Speaker, and offer the hope that the outpouring of a community of all Prince Edward Island, and hope it shows them how much that he meant to all of us as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'm touched by the words of the Premier, who obviously had a far closer relationship with Ross than I did. Although I did meet Ross, and I held him in high regard for the work that he did in the time that I knew him. And, you know, he sat in this House for 5 years, from 1991 to 96, and at that time he was relatively young. And I know that there were many young women in Kings County who had the eye for, you know, he was a heartthrob, and there were a lot of young women in Kings County who really enjoyed Ross's his style and who he was. And of course, as the Premier said, he was heavily involved in and left an indelible impression on this province, because he was involved in that bill that created the single-member districts across our province. And when he left elected life, his contributions to this province, of course, did not stop. As the Premier said, he was involved, his volunteer efforts are legendary across this province. He touched the lives of so many through, whether it was through politics or sports or junior achievement or the United Way and all of the other organizations in which he participated. So my sincerest condolences on behalf of the official opposition to his wife Mary, his children Laura, John Ross and Jay, and to his mother Helen, and of course his countless friends across Prince Edward Island. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the years I had the great pleasure of working with Ross Young many times. He was a very cheerful man, and his companionship was always marked by good humor, wit and insight. Ross was also a very hard worker, and hundreds of Islanders benefited from his diligence and his professionalism. On behalf of the Third Party and myself, I want to pass on my sincere condolences to his friends and family. Prince Edward Island has lost a truly bright spark, and his contributions to our province will greatly be missed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to say a few words about Ross. Ross was a good friend. I think anybody who ever ran into Ross felt like they walked away as Ross's friend. I have numerous times through my life kind of intertwined with things that Ross was doing, and probably the most impactful one for me was back a number of years ago. Ross was working for the Minister of Education, who was Alan McIsaac at the time, and I was the education critic. And it just so happened that we both had children who didn't have enough kids to have a full hockey team, and he called me up and he said, could we merge them together and you and I coach it? And I'm like, if it's okay with your boss, I'm okay with that. Anyways, it was one of the best winters that I ever had coaching. And I'm not going to say we didn't talk about politics. We didn't talk about education maybe, but there was a lot of political conversations, and Ross taught me a lot that year about how to motivate some of the young players. He was a great motivator. He was so good with kids. He was so entertaining, and he was able to get his message across to them in a way that was quite direct, but they didn't feel like they were being put down in the process. We didn't have a great hockey team, and I know at the start of the year he said, what do you think we'll do? How do you think we'll do? And he says, we'll teach the defenseman to pinch. That's what we'll do. and he did. He taught the defenseman to pinch, and we won a handful of hockey games from our pinching defenseman. Then over the years, we parted ways, and we didn't coach together again, but I would see him from time to time. He was involved with the Holland College football program, so when I was around Holland College in my elect years, I would run into him, or you might run into him down in the street here walking a family around who had a son they were trying to recruit into the football program, and he'd be showing them around. And I thought, there wouldn't be a person on earth I could think of who would be better to take a family around and make them interested in staying here than Ross Young, because he was putting on the Ritz and introducing them to everybody on the street because he knew them all. Then a few years back, I had a call. Kings County female Bantam hockey team was hosting the Atlantics, and they said, we're Bell Alliance doing the broadcast, and they're going to have all the equipment there, and all you have to do is show up and do the play-by-play. And I'm like, I can't do the play-by-play. I think the Premier did some play-by-play for that. And they said, no, come and do the play-by-play. And I'm like, who am I doing it with? And they said, Ross Young. And I said, I'll be there. I'll be there in a heartbeat. And again, Ross was entertaining. And I'll leave you with one story, and Ross had a million stories about a million things, but one of the favorite ones I had, because he told it to me so many times, is that his political career was in fact cut short because he did lose after only 5 years. And he said, there was one particular household in that area, and he said how they voted, that's how the government went. He said, so it came election day, and we went down to get them, and he said, we met them in the car with the Tories, and I knew I was done. And indeed he was. Anyways, Ross was a great friend to everyone, a great friend to all Islanders. It's sad to see someone so young and so full of life leave us so early. And I want to send out my condolences to all of his family and all Islanders who interacted with Ross over the years. Thanks.
Honourable member for Blairry Inverness, third-party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too want to rise to give condolences to the family of Ross Young. From my perspective, Ross and I had a common bond, I guess, in the respect that we were sons of politicians, sometimes called a little differently than that, maybe, but we were sons of that followed in our father's footsteps. And Ross and I always had that kind of common bond. We used to have some good laughs about it. But my dad sit actually with Johnny Ross Young in the legislature here, and I know my father would tell lots of funny stories about Johnny Ross Young. He was a character himself, and Ross definitely followed in his father's footsteps. But I also got to know Ross when he became the executive assistant to Minister Alan McIsaac, and when Alan was Minister of Education. And I can recall going on tours with Alan and his district on issues around tourism and whatnot, and Ross would be driving us around, and he had a story on every house. There was always some story, and they were always very witty and fun, but he was a person that was very passionate about his region, his district. He seemed to have a real zest for life, Mr. Speaker, and so I certainly want to pass on condolences to his family and to this time of grief as such. But I think he'll definitely be forever known for his quick wit and his storytelling, and certainly I admire that in him. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anyone else that'd like to speak? Well, it's pretty hard for me not to get up when actually Ross was a childhood friend of mine. And I can take you back a little further and tell you a few stories, but I don't want to take up your day telling stories about me and Ross, and our hockey days. And yes, you wanted Ross on your line with you because he was one solid defenseman that everybody wanted. If you were coming down the boards and Ross Young was on defense, you weren't making it any further. I'll guarantee you. And you think the women were after him in his later years? You should have seen him in his earlier years. He was a charmer. Ross was an all-around good guy. And as most of you have already said, like, the first time you met him, it's just like you know him all your life. And he was one of these characters that just the first impression was good with Ross. He's always had a smile, he always had a laugh, and my heart just sank the morning I got the call that he had passed, and I just couldn't believe it. But I had a chance to work with Ross, as most did, when he was working with Minister Alan McIsaac, and he was a great fellow. He always had your back, and one thing about Ross, he was the MLA in the district, so he knew a lot of my issues, and he helped me out a lot when he was with working with Alan McIsaac in the district, and we did have a lot of laughs. We compared notes, his notes with my notes over the years, and how things have changed with social media, and he didn't have social media, and it was always house calls with him. But no, he was an all-around good guy. He was a great fellow to grow up with. Whenever Ross kept going on to his education and stuff, we kind of lost our ways. But once he started working with McIsaac, and we kind of made our connection again and talked old days. But he was a great fellow to grow up with. The family, a great family, great to the community, and it was an honor. And I told him the last time we were working together that it was an honor to sit in the seat that he sat in, and he was really choked up about that. But anyway, I just thought I'd get up and say a few words, and to his family, his extended family, his mother. It's just, his mother must be devastated, but it's just so sad what the family did for us, and then to take him away so young. But anyway, thank you. The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we have another speaker?
So that motion carried.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Carried. Sorry. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry for that.
No, it's my fault.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Third Party, the following resolution of sympathy. Whereas Mr. Roger Solomon, member of the Legislative Assembly for First Kings from 1993 to 1996, passed away on April 14th, 2021. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize the contributions made by the late member, Mr. Roger Solomon, to this province. And Mr. Speaker, it is difficult to get up and speak to these resolutions today. I think the older one gets and the longer he serves in here, perhaps the more, unfortunately, common it might become. But these two gentlemen, Ross and now Roger Solomon, were seatmates, Mr. Speaker, in District 1. And I rise today, it is a privilege to rise to pay tribute to Roger, a former neighbor and friend, Mr. Speaker, a teacher, a principal in Surrey for many years after serving in the Royal Canadian Navy. Mr. Speaker, Roger was elected as one of the, as I said, one of the two dual members from the district of First Kings in 1993, and part of what would become the final Legislative Assembly with dual members, Mr. Speaker. And when I was a journalist at the Eastern Graphic, perhaps you don't realize things as they're happening at the time, Mr. Speaker, but one of the great political coups of all time happened in 1993, Mr. Speaker, long forgotten now and will sound quite foreign to people who weren't familiar with politics back in that day. But the seats in the dual ridings were largely broken up by religion, Mr. Speaker, Catholic and Protestant. And Ross, of course, was a Protestant member, Mr. Speaker. Roger was the Roman Catholic member. And my friend and former boss and the late Peter McQuaid had been recruited, Mr. Speaker, in 1993 to be the PC candidate in Surrey, and was a Catholic, and was, for some reason, Alex McCauley, that great political foreseer, decided to flip Ross and Roger. So Ross actually ran as a Protestant in what was known as the Catholic seat, which would be a big I mean, I remember doing stories talking to the late Father Bolger just about how outside of the norm this was and what a political risk it was, but it all turned out both Roger and Ross had won the election, Mr. Speaker, and that's really when I got to know Roger, the politician. Roger, to me, was always my neighbor. He operated the Roma Cottages on Kays Road, where I grew up, and the first real sign that summer was coming and school was almost over was to see Roger drive by and wave or give a hoot or stop for a quick chat at the King Homestead. He was going to open the cottages, and that meant that, that summer was coming, and most importantly for me at that age, that school was almost out for the summer, Mr. Speaker. And the Solomon name, Mr. Speaker, is written throughout the history of Georgetown, of course, and that's where Roger traces his roots like I do. The names P.J. Solomon, Genevieve Solomon, Raymond Solomon, they were merchants, business people, community stalwarts, Mr. Speaker, and those are words that I would use to describe Roger as well. He was quiet. If Ross Young was the yin, he was the yang. One was quiet, one was outgoing, but they made a good team, and I watched that as a journalist. And what I always admired most about Roger was just that he went about his business. He didn't seem to look for the headlines. He just went about his business. He helped whoever he could help, and was a good constituency MLA. And most recently, it's funny how it all continues to come full circle, Mr. Speaker. My daughter Camden played hockey for the last 2 winters with Ellie, who is the granddaughter of Roger, on a team coached by Terry, one of Roger's children. So we've stayed interconnected. We've always chatted. He was very happy to see both ends of the Kays Road paved by the former MLA, Mr. Speaker. He was long lobbying governments to get that done, and it was long needed, of course. But, you know, as I said, having known both of these men for so many years, it's strange to be speaking to resolutions of sympathy for them both today, and ironic that they would be seatmates, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think I'm quite ready to say goodbye to that nostalgic part of my life, but thankfully they will live on in our memories, Mr. Speaker. And just a warm, friendly, kind person, concerned about the welfare of people, Mr. Speaker. So just to Roger's family, to Paulette, to Terry, to Kim, to Frank, and all of their families, I offer my deepest sympathies to Roger on a life well lived. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a privilege to rise and to pay tribute on behalf of the official opposition to Roger. Another Eastern King's son lost, and also, as the Premier said, it's hard to get up here 3 times in a row, and you sort of it's really brought to you the enormity of all the death and sadness that's gone on around us over the last week or so. And I know, again, Roger lived in Kings County. He was a teacher in Surrey School for so long, and he was many years the senior of Ross. And I don't know whether Roger ever taught Ross at Surrey School. Maybe you know, Speaker. No, they didn't know, but their lives overlapped in so many ways. So, and Roger had such an influence, even though Ross was not one of his students. He clearly had an influence over hundreds, thousands, probably, of East Kings students. And of course, his cottage business that the Premier referenced, that was a place that, you know, so many people came year after year after year to the Roma Cottages. So again, my condolences on behalf of the official opposition to his wife Sheila and his children and grandchildren, and to his sisters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was very sad to hear of Roger Solomon's passing. As a member of the Legislative Assembly, Roger was known for his quiet, diligence, and willingness to always advocate for the residents of Eastern Kings. I had the opportunity to meet Roger several times and was impressed with his sincere determination to advocate for Islanders in an understated and determined way. On behalf of myself and the Third Party, I certainly want to pass on our condolences and sympathy to Roger's family and friends. He was a truly distinguished representative for Eastern Kings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anyone else would like to speak on this? Again, I'm starting to get worried in my seat here. I'm up so many times. But you know, I know Roger also. Roger was the principal and a teacher of the Surrey Consolidated that I attended. And Roger was a stern principal, rough around the edges, but well respected. He knew how to handle it, he knew how to handle himself, and he knew how to handle others. And I spent a lot of time in Roger's office. I wasn't always this quiet, I'll let you know. I was the teacher's pet at one time. But, you know, Roger had a lot of respect in the school. You know, every morning he went to school, his office was just outside the main door, and Roger would stand there until every student was in the school. You know, you know, that shows a lot right there, to make sure everybody got through the door safely. But yeah, Roger was, you know, I can tell you a few stories, but again, I don't want to take up anybody's time. But I wasn't always quiet, like I said. And to his family, you know, my deepest sympathy. They grew up in Surrey also, and to Roger's family, our deepest sympathy goes out. And you know, you never realize, like, your school teachers in your younger days, that they're ever going to pass. But when they do pass, it just brings you back right to where you were the day of, when you were going to school, eh? But you think they're going to live forever and ever and ever. But everybody, you know, Roger was 83 and he had a good life. You know, he moved back down to Georgetown, and where he was happy. He was definitely happy in Surrey, but Georgetown was his home. So he just went back home, and yeah, so again, I want to send out deepest sympathies to his family. Thank you. Shall it carry? Carry. Now, kind of lost our way. Matters of privilege and recognition of guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anyone here needs to see much more of me here for the next little while, but I did want to, in my greetings, welcome all of my colleagues back after a planning week, Mr. Speaker, and which I can assume was a busy week for all, but it's good to be back here. And to all of those who were tuned in on Eastlink, Mr. Speaker, and through online. I want to begin by commending Birchwood School with their Cobra cleanup, Mr. Speaker. Over 500 staff and students cleaning up the school property and community parks, Mr. Speaker, all done in memory of Josh and Oliver Underhay, Mr. Speaker, who taken too early from us, I believe, 2 years ago or close to today. And it's, I believe, that effort at Birchwood where Josh loved it so much. It's a wonderful tribute, and I think a wonderful recognition of a legacy of two individuals that will live long into the future. So my thoughts and appreciation for those who organized that. Mr. Speaker, I was also happy to read about PEI's operational command center, Mr. Speaker, and their commander, Daryl McDonald, who was recognized as the OCC Commander of the Year. A lovely award for somebody who works hard. Mr. Speaker, I think the award is for orchestrating immediate response in a calm manner, and it's an important service that is provided. So thank you to Daryl and the team for their strong management and leadership. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say that tonight I will be taking the opportunity to attend a show at Trailside. Good Girl is the name of the show, starring Melissa McKenzie, Mr. Speaker. Sold out tonight, but tickets remain for tomorrow night's show, I've been told to say. It's a cabaret-style performance, Mr. Speaker, which is produced by Kitbag Productions. Kitbag Productions is a company started and operated by my son Jake, Melissa McKenzie, and Rebecca Perrant, Mr. Speaker. And of course, it's an extra meaningful show for me tonight. Not only are Jake and Melissa partners in business, they're partners in life. So there's an army of Kings and Hempels who are coming to the Trailside tonight for the performance, and I just look forward to it. I'm proud of Melissa for putting this together and for telling her story, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to seeing it in person and encourage all Islanders to get out and continue to support arts in this wonderful province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this week is National Volunteer Week, and you know, there's countless examples of Islanders volunteering in their communities to help each other out. And a couple of examples of that. One is the family of the late Ruth Walsh in my area. They had their second annual Ruth Walsh half marathon run, and they raised over $1,600 for the South Shore Food Share, which is the food bank which operates in the South Shore region. So on behalf of Ruth's family, I want to thank everybody who participated in that, and it's a grand event and for a very worthy cause. And as the Premier mentioned, it was 2 years ago yesterday that Josh and Oliver Underhay died. And it was a beautiful thing that Birchwood School did under the direction of Krista Connolly, the teacher there. As the Premier said, a lasting legacy. They wanted to make a small difference, and they wanted to recognise and honour Josh and Oliver, and they did that in a beautiful way. And I know there are many of us who were thinking of Josh and Oliver yesterday, and of Carrie and little Lyndon, and of Josh's mum, Sally. So I wanted to thank the Premier for his words, and on this sad day, adding to that. But we think of you often, Josh and Oliver. We miss you. Thank you, Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to add my kudos to the students of Birchwood School for keeping Josh and Oliver's memory alive in a very special day they had. Mr. Speaker, it's great to be back in the legislature again today, and I want to say hello to everyone back home in Evangeline Musqueam. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, I was pleased to have the opportunity to receive my first COVID-19 vaccination at the Summerside Clinic located in Holland College building. It was a very smooth process, and all the personnel there did a fantastic job making it happen. We know that vaccinations are the key to eventually returning to some resemblance of normal. We also know that the risk of contracting COVID-19 far exceeds the risk of any potential vaccine side effects. I would like to encourage all Islanders to get vaccinated at their earliest convenience, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize this as National Volunteer Week. As we know in this House as politicians, without volunteers we may not have gotten here. And, they play a very important role in the political system here in PEI, and they're the backbone of election campaigns, and they often drive the ideas and enthusiasm that political parties come to embrace. We also have some fantastic volunteers in PEI beyond the political scene, whether it's community volunteers, environmental volunteers, minor sports volunteers, and many, many more. These individuals make PEI and its various communities a better place for all of us to live. Thank you to all volunteers.
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome everybody from District 19 and all Islanders watching here today. I want to give a special shout out to who feels a little bit lonely in this corner today. I want to give a shout out to the Minister of Education, and hope she's recovering well, and hope to see her back as soon as possible. But Mr. Speaker, I'd like especially to welcome those fishers in the industry that are working hard as the season prepares to start. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we were encouraged to hear about the federal government plans to invest in small craft harbors. This is something I've been a strong advocate for, with support from the Atlantic Fisheries Ministers. Our supporting marine infrastructure proposal was presented last year to Minister Jordan and tabled in this House. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize that our fishers and our harbour authorities for working with us on this project to ensure we have safe access for all. I'd like to also recognize the hard work that went through by pushing this forward, and the collaboration it took between all the Atlantic Fisheries Minister and Minister Jordan's office. I look forward to meeting with the Chair of the Finance Committee on this to ensure our small craft harbours on PEI and Atlantic Canada receive the attention they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today. Say hello to everyone watching in District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow. It's been a while, Mr. Speaker, since I've had the privilege of being a player to hoist a trophy. I do want to congratulate all the teams in the Queens County Rec League recently wrapped up. Of course, winning the second division, the Merchantman Silverbacks, which I was the teammate of, the Shrina Electric Bolts, who won the first division, and the Greater Stratford Area Gulls, who won the third division. And I believe a constituent of mine, Nick Curry, was scoring the winner in that game. So again, just want to congratulate all the winners of the Queens County Rec League, and a big thank you to Jared Doucette. He is the league organizer, and he does an amazing job. And I always tell all the players that I coach to make sure you thank the referees, even if they don't make the calls in your favor. And of course, at the end of the day, make sure you thank all the arena staff for making sure you get on the ice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice, Public Safety and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I won't be long. Mr. Speaker, I just want to welcome everyone from Stand Up Marshfield. And Mr. Speaker, I want to give a big happy birthday to my youngest daughter, Janelle. She turned 11 years old yesterday, and she's just a wonderful little girl and an animal lover and a sports enthusiast, Mr. Speaker, so I wish her a happy birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say hello to all the great people that would be watching in from District 26, Albert and Bloomfield, and certainly to all Islanders right from tip to tip that are watching in today. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities, Mr. Speaker, referenced about our small craft harbours and the like. And Mr. Speaker, it's something that as often as possible I certainly enjoy taking a drive down to what, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful, picturesque harbours in all of PEI at Northport, taking a drive down there, taking a walk around the wharf, and just this past weekend, certainly down again. It's great to see all the traps out on the wharf, the boats in the water, and looking forward to that first feed of fresh island lobster, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I as well, over the weekend, was able and eligible to receive my first COVID-19 vaccine, and I, like the leader of the third party had stated, I certainly encourage all Islanders, whenever they are eligible, to make sure that they do get out, that they do get vaccinated. You know, there is that light at the end of the tunnel, and what that light is the vaccination, Mr. Speaker. And I do see that the leader of the third party has stepped out for a minute, which is a little unfortunate because I was going to end on a little bit of a lighter note. Back when we were debating here in the House a motion, a doctor for every Islander, Mr. Speaker, and I'd referenced a number of initiatives that were forthcoming in both the Department of Health and Wellness budget as well as Health PEI budget. And the leader of the third party had indicated that when I take those budgets on the floor of the House, that I should bring a pillow because I'm going to be there for a long time. So anyway, I come in today and there wasn't a pillow, but there was this beautiful blue cushion on my seat, Mr. Speaker, and I only anticipate or could guess who that may have came from. So my thanks to whoever the bearer of this gift is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, just in the future, we don't recognize when people ain't in the House. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I had the opportunity to go to UPEI and be involved in the judging for the capstone course for the MBA project. So I'd like to extend my congratulations to the current cohort of Executive MBA, including particularly those who had to do that tough presentation, John Connolly, Jordan Sampson, and Richard Awuku. They did a great job. It's really tough to do, but it's also the last piece of what has been a very intense program. And again, my congratulations to the coordinators of the Executive MBA program who have managed to sort of pull it off even despite all the restrictions of the pandemic. And that's Don Wagner, Tina Saxida, and the ever-patient Grace McCourt. So my congratulations to all the other participants who I didn't get a chance to meet this year. And I know that, as it was for me, it will be something that really changes their lives and opens doors they never imagined. So great congratulations to the current cohort and the 2021 graduating class for the Executive MBA program at UPEI.
The Honourable Member of Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I welcome listeners from Brighton, and I would also like to thank all the many volunteers we have on PEI in particular, since I'm a foodie and amateur cook myself, those volunteers that take it upon themselves to provide meals to people who need it. I've already mentioned John Pritchard in my district, but it turns out he's not the only one. Sandra Sunil and her parents and brothers also do their best to feed the hungry. In the past, they have served up to 100 meals for families at the farm center. But COVID, of course, stopped that, but not the effort of the family. They fittingly call their organization For Love, For Care, and continue to deliver prepared foods and groceries, including 300 Christmas dinners last Christmas. So hello to Sandra, if you're listening. And you can all meet Sandra and her family and taste their food at the Charlottetown Farmers Market, where they operate 4-H catering, and I can assure you their food is delicious. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member statement. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was catching up on my Dialogue with Drake and DeBoo podcast this morning. They were interviewing Dr. Rachel Crowder, who is the executive director of the PEI Rape and Sexual Assault Center. I was really struck by the whole conversation, of course, but there was one part in particular that inspired me to open my computer, and even though I was running late, and write this member statement. They were talking about how Statistics Canada defines sexual assault level 1 as, I quote, an assault committed in circumstances of a sexual nature such that the sexual integrity of the victim is violated. Level 1 involves minor physical injuries or no injuries to the victim, end quote. Sexual assault is still an assault, even if there are no physical injuries. The reality is that there is no such thing as a sexual assault without injury. Trauma is the injury. The resulting impacts of trauma can be profound and lifelong. They can completely change the course of one's life. Until we fully understand and acknowledge this, we will never truly support survivors of sexual violence at a governmental level. Community organizations get this, and we would do well to follow their lead. Imagine for a moment that you were involved in an unfortunate accident while playing hockey. The nature of your injuries found you with a broken leg. Imagine not treating this injury. Imagine not going to physio to build strength, work the muscles, and work towards getting as well as you can. Now imagine you were also told that this was your fault. Imagine just not doing any sort of treatment at all. When you consider the two options, there are two very different life outcomes. It impacts what sort of employment people can get, if they're able to work at all, if they are able to access post-secondary education, their physical and mental health, their relationships, how they trust and bond with people, etc. In most cases, trauma is both preventable and treatable, but we have to understand it, and we have to act quickly when someone presents themselves as having experienced recent trauma. As we consider the high numbers of sexual assaults in our province, we must also consider the crucial nature of early intervention and prevention. We have high rates of addiction and mental health issues, both of which can be a direct result of trauma. If we as a government could make that connection, we would see that early intervention and prevention are the keys to moving the dial towards a healthier province in every single way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. As a province that relies so heavily on a steady flow of money from the federal government for everything from healthcare to social services to wage subsidies, Islanders pay a lot of attention when it is budget day in Ottawa. Yesterday, Chrystia Freeland delivered the first ever Canadian budget by a woman, and in this most uncertain of times, it's going to have some profound implications for a lot of people who call Prince Edward Island home. Back in 2014, as a rookie MP, Minister Freeland wrote that the low economic growth and high economic inequality of the day could be traced back to a political way of thinking championed by Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and later here in Canada, Stephen Harper. And Minister Freeland lamented this neoliberal attitude to governing, which encouraged a lack of government action, too little stimulus, too little oversight, too little redistribution of wealth. If there's one thing that we've seen over the last year, it's that governments, and only governments, have the authority, the power, and the financial capacity to combat massive threats to our well-being. And as we have also seen all over the world, jurisdictions informed by what now looks like a horribly outdated approach of small government, of lack of regulation, and a reluctance to be interventionary, have served their citizens extremely poorly. There are many aspects of this budget that suggest a new approach to governance and fiscal management that I would argue are far better suited to our times. $30 billion on a subsidized national childcare program, $18 billion on a green recovery to help create over 1 million jobs, and a move towards fairer wages with minimum wage set at $15 for federally regulated jobs. There are many other items that will also have an immediate and profound impact on islanders and island businesses, including the extension of various federal support programs. And let's remember that 8 out of every $10 that have been spent on relief programs have come from the federal government. A new program specifically for the tourism sector, money for long-term care, and increases to old age security. Yes, this looks like an election budget. Yes, Liberal governments have historically not followed through on grand promises. Yes, the devil will be in the details. Yes, spending commitments stretch far beyond the current government's mandate. But despite all that, there's something vaguely comforting for me in that it actually looks like a relatively coherent vision for Canada's fiscal future. Budget discussions are inevitably about numbers, but if they're only about numbers alone, they tend to numb the mind. Spending and tax policies signal political values and intent. Is this the same old, or is this something new that is more in alignment with the realities of a post-COVID world where a new approach to fiscal policy is desperately called for? Whether you agree or not with the new direction signaled by this federal budget, it is undeniably a plan with a vision. And in politics, a lack of vision is no longer acceptable in a world that is hurtling at full speed towards an uncertain future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Montague, Kilmuir, the Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today to congratulate the Montague Regional High School women's basketball team on their recent Island Championship in the Senior Women's AA Division. The team is coached by Dwayne Yoshikawa, Jay Shaw, Sue Yoshikawa, and Abby Hameline. Mr. Speaker, the women's team was led by season first-team league All-Star Kathleen Ryan, who averaged close to 18 points per game, and second-team league All-Star Maggie Murphy. Murphy and Carrie Doherty were both chosen as tournament All-Stars, and Kathleen Ryan was named tournament MVP. The women's team finished 8-3 in the regular season and first in the AA division. Mr. Speaker, they cruised past Bluefield 45-30 and then went on to defeat Charlottetown Rural 67-47 to take home the gold medal on March 31st. In the championship game, Erin Morris was named player of the game with 16 points to lead the team. Kathleen Ryan was solid again in the final. Maggie Murphy chipped in 12 points in the second half, and Carrie Doherty was key on the defensive end. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the entire team and coaching staff, and especially the grade 12 graduating students, on a successful and memorable final basketball season at Montague Regional High. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taking as notice. No? For our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, the Premier and some of his Atlantic counterparts spoke with the Prime Minister to discuss the provision of support to Ontario, a province, of course, that's been particularly hard hit recently by the COVID pandemic. We are indeed stronger together, and we should always consider opportunities to support other members of the Confederation. But, as I'm sure the Premier is aware, there's a delicate balance to be struck between supporting others and maintaining our own local capacity here on the island. It's clear that Ontario has a need for more healthcare workers, no doubt about that. However, healthcare services here on PEI are already significantly under-resourced. We've seen repeated ER and ICU closures in recent months, and with our first COVID hospitalizations this weekend, the situation becomes even more delicate. A question to the Premier. Can you provide an update on this and how you are ensuring that our local healthcare services are not compromised?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the Leader of the Opposition has noted, I did receive a call from both Premier Ford of Ontario and the Prime Minister of the country on the weekend, just outlining first the situation in the rest of the country in terms of the COVID pandemic and this third wave, and also to see if there was any opportunity for PEI to do a little bit to help. We never want to say no in that situation, Mr. Speaker, but I did articulate to both individuals that we're not in an overabundance of human resources here. our first priority is to maintain the health and safety of all islanders, and there's a lot of unknown in this province as well, Mr. Speaker, with COVID knocking on our door. So we strictly undertook, we asked health professionals to have a look and see who might be available, Mr. Speaker, and if they could be spared, and then of course, if they would want to go. I think I'll have a statement later today, but I haven't honestly looked at it yet, but I believe 8 people have suggested they would be interested. Half a dozen of those were nursing graduates, and I don't think that's a burning desire for Ontario at this point. So we might see one, perhaps, health professional, Mr. Speaker, if they still want to go. More details to follow, but certainly want to try to do what we can as part of Team Canada, for sure.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. This will be, of course, a potentially very dangerous assignment for any healthcare workers that choose to go to Ontario. Our government needs strong assurances that these workers will be kept safe in the workplace that they arrive at there. This is particularly concerning if the Premier, and he just mentioned nursing students there in his answer to my first question, if they're new graduates as they go, because they have less experience, of course, and they're less willing to speak up if they find themselves in perhaps a potentially unsafe situation. A question to the Premier: how will you ensure that any healthcare workers who do go to Ontario are guaranteed a safe working environment?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that would be the very first effort that we would undertake, is just to make sure everybody knows what they are facing if they were to go up there, what their job could be. And Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of details that still remain to be figured out if to any extent we're able to help. But yeah, I mean, the safety of islanders is our first and most important endeavour, Mr. Speaker, and that would be extended to those if they chose to go to assist our sister province of Ontario in this time of need, Mr. Speaker. And those details our senior staff at Health and Wellness, Health PEI, Mr. Speaker, and CPHO are sort of talking about and working with those who have expressed an interest to let them know if it's possible. And we will know in a few days what our effort will be, if any, but absolutely safety is paramount, Mr. Speaker, and this time is more so than ever. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the COVID situation, of course, in Ontario is indeed desperate, and as new case numbers threaten to overwhelm the capacity of some parts of their healthcare system. Many of the people getting sick in Ontario today have no choice but to go to work. And they may not have the agency or the social capital to speak up if they feel that they are indeed in an unsafe situation or environment. A question to the Premier: are we doing all that we can here on Prince Edward Island to protect the most vulnerable islanders who are in a similar situation here?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly feel we're trying our very best. I mean, we identified through our vaccination program our most vulnerable being our seniors, Mr. Speaker, and we put those individuals at the front of the line. As you know, we were ahead of the curve when it came to the use of AstraZeneca, Mr. Speaker, with those 18 to 29-year-olds on the front lines, Mr. Speaker, in situations like the Leader of the Opposition just alluded to. That has since the advice on that has changed, and we've had to back off on that. But I do think we're a little bit ahead of the curve than most places, Mr. Speaker. And we continue to try to roll out a vaccination program with the hope of getting Islanders, 80% of those adult Islanders vaccinated by the end of June or sooner, Mr. Speaker. And I think I speak for all Islanders when I can say that can't come soon enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. There are many factors, of course, that have contributed to the horrendous situation that exists in Ontario, including the choices that they made about how vaccines are distributed and certain policy choices made by that provincial government. Earlier in this sitting, my colleague from Summerside, Wilmot, asked about the provision of paid sick leave for workers, something identified as a critical component of keeping the most vulnerable safe. A question to the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. There was a $1 million fund, the Special Leave Fund, that was announced a few weeks ago that was designed to provide some supports in this area. Can you give us an update on what the uptake on that fund is?
Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, honourable members. So you're exactly right. There was a $1 million fund which we wanted to make sure we were ahead of. So in case we ever Obviously, we wanted people to stay home if there was any symptoms. We didn't want them going out to work, so that's why this $1 million fund was put in place. I don't have any numbers in front of me as far as what the uptake is. I will go back and get some more in detail for you. I know there hasn't been great uptake on it because we've, in a sense, the majority of our COVID cases have been from travel from away, so we haven't had a big uptake due to no shutdowns or circuit breakers at this point. The COVID cases that we have had, they have been traveling outside the province and have been in self-isolation, and the federal government supports have been tremendous as well. So with the supports keeping people home through the federal government has certainly helped, but I'll go back and get an updated number and bring back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Minister. But to be clear, this special leave fund that we've just been talking about is a temporary program. It's not legislated sick leave. So if PEI wants to maintain our status and the envy of the country as a relatively safe haven, and to avoid the situation in Ontario, experts tell us that paid sick leave is a critical component of protecting both individuals and society at large. To the Premier, will your government put in place paid sick leave for all Prince Edward Islanders who are not already covered through their work?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's something that we have been trying to respond to. I understand the premise of the question from the Leader of the Opposition, and it is our desire to try to do everything we can. We've been saying from the very beginning, if you're sick, if you're symptomatic, don't go to work, Mr. Speaker, and we know, and we've come to know during this time of COVID that that isn't an option for everybody. So that's what we're trying to determine, Mr. Speaker. But I think, as highlighted in the federal budget last night, I think that those issues and opportunities are on the table, and I think it's important as a province we look at to see what we can put in place, Mr. Speaker, and it's a discussion that's long past due, and I think that we have to remain open-minded to it, Mr. Speaker, figure out how it could work, what the cost would be, how we work with the private sector, Mr. Speaker, but it's a conversation that's here and we have to deal with it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Paid sick leave is identified as a critical component. Full vaccination, of course, is another one of those. Many experts, including the National Medical Organization, Canadian Medical Association, are saying that essential workers who should have already been vaccinated are still waiting. Some of them are still waiting for those vaccines, putting both themselves and the wider community at risk. To the Premier, how is Prince Edward Island doing when it comes to full vaccination of all frontline healthcare workers?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would need to reach back to Dr. Morrison and to the extensive notes that we take when she's addressing us. I think that I feel very confident saying that a large percentage have been fully vaccinated, which means 2 doses, Mr. Speaker. I don't think it's been 100% across the board for a variety of reasons. Maybe some people couldn't take the vaccine or couldn't get to an appointment at a certain time, but I know in my conversations with Dr. Morrison that we continue to roll out an aggressive vaccination program, and we want to make sure all Islanders, Mr. Speaker, who want this vaccine, we encourage them to take the vaccine, that they get it. And Mr. Speaker, those on our front lines are extremely important. They're the leaders in this whole thing, and we want to get to that level, Mr. Speaker. I'll get a full report back to the honourable member hopefully before the end of question period. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. With our first cases of COVID-19 requiring hospitalisation, the need for all hospital staff to be vaccinated has been brought into sharp focus. Building defences against COVID requires a coordinated and a seamless set of rules and measures to keep us safe. If there are any weak spots, the whole system becomes ineffective and could be entirely compromised. Another question to the Premier. Have all hospital staff who come into contact with patients on a regular basis on Prince Edward Island been vaccinated?
Mr. Speaker, once again, I don't think I could definitively say all. I think the efforts have been made. It's also, this is a voluntary thing, Mr. Speaker. Maybe some individuals have chosen not to, but I'll get a full report from Dr. Morrison as to what percentage of those in the health system and particularly in frontline hospitals, Mr. Speaker, are vaccinated. I'm confident in saying that the number is very, very, very high, Mr. Speaker, but I will get a full report back to the honourable member in this House as soon as I possibly can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital, of course, is our primary care centre for COVID cases. And many different healthcare workers come into contact regularly in that hospital with patients, doctors and nurses, of course, but also a lot of other healthcare workers, from cleaning staff to nutritional services staff to orderlies. We've been told that non-medical staff in hospitals have not yet been given an opportunity to receive a vaccine. Not that they've chosen not to take it, but they haven't even been given an opportunity. And the clinic that was specifically set up in the QEH is now closed. To the Premier, why are some frontline workers in hospitals who regularly circulate through patients' rooms not fully protected, thereby putting themselves and everybody else at heightened risk?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that's a question that I'll need to direct to Dr. Morrison, Mr. Speaker, who's been at the front of this and has been the stalwart and, dare I say, the savior of PEI, Mr. Speaker, with her efforts. And I think that the vaccination rollout that we have been delivering is one that is based on national protocol, Mr. Speaker, and one that is aggressive. As of today, I think we have close to 34,000 islanders with at least one vaccination, Mr. Speaker, and that number continues to grow, and we continue. I think we're up to 10,000 or so with both vaccinations, Mr. Speaker. So that's a great pace for us. But, Mr. Speaker, I'll get a full report, and I'll ask Dr. Morrison that specific question that was asked to me of the Leader of the Opposition, and I will endeavour to get the answer back, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the federal government announced $1.5 million in funding to prevent gun and gang violence on PEI. A question to the Minister of Justice and Public Safety. Can you describe the problem and prevalence of gun and gang violence on PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. And that federal announcement was great news. It was that's funding that the federal government has given to every province across this country, Mr. Speaker. And fortunately, we do not have a huge problem of guns and gangs on Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, but we're not immune to crime either on this island, Mr. Speaker. So it was great to have the federal government agree to make a Made in PEI solution for the funding, Mr. Speaker, and we're very happy to help out the municipal police forces, Mr. Speaker, with that funding.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A presentation at the federal government's 2018 summit on gun and gang violence pointed out, quote, gang members and prospective members are often struggling with the effects of trauma, the child welfare system, colonialism, family and community violence, poverty, homelessness, lack of education, bullying, marginalization, dislocation, societal inequities, and other structural and systemic issues. Impoverished communities are also the primary victims of gang crime and violence, end quote. In fact, the first key theme identified in the summit's report is the need to support prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation initiatives. A question to the Minister. How much of this new funding is going to support initiatives of this nature?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's a great question, Mr. Speaker. And of course, a lot of the funding is going to prevention and education, Mr. Speaker. That is key to prevention of crime, Mr. Speaker. It's prevention of individuals getting involved in crime, Mr. Speaker, and it's an upstream approach, which a lot of this funding is going towards, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud that we were able to access that funding, and I want to thank the federal government for that funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to an October 2020 federal briefing note, PEI was the only provincial territorial jurisdiction in Canada without a contribution agreement in place to fund government measures to reduce gun violence. A question to the Minister of Justice and Public Safety. Has the province finalized its contribution agreement, and if so, will the Minister table it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and the Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated in my first answer, Mr. Speaker, that we were the only province not to have the agreement signed, Mr. Speaker. That's why the federal government worked with us to make a Made in PEI solution, Mr. Speaker. And I'll absolutely table the agreement, Mr. Speaker, with the federal government, and we look forward to the funding and the crime prevention, Mr. Speaker, on this file. Thank you.
Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a tweet, the Member of Parliament for Charlottetown suggested part of the funding would be going towards crime prevention education in schools. Across the country, concerns have been raised about the inclusion of police in schools, specifically about the relationship between police and marginalised communities. A question to the Minister. What community stakeholders are at the table when decisions about police in schools are being made?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're happy that this funding, Mr. Speaker, can add 3.5 new officers, Mr. Speaker, across this island, Mr. Speaker, Summerside, Kensington, and Charlottetown, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great announcement. And when we're talking about police and school, I know the Charlottetown schools, high schools have, the municipality does that on their own, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to other schools, we have conversation with education, Mr. Speaker, and that's a conversation that continues to ongo. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Very, very vague answer, Minister, but you should probably get a little more proactive and make sure that there's certain stakeholders are definitely at those tables when those conversations are happening. Indeed, public consultation and engagement is an important part of any crime prevention. The success of law enforcement hinges on public trust and confidence. Minister, how do your department and Island Police Services engage Islanders to assist in the design and implementation of crime prevention measures to ensure these measures are as effective as possible and minimize unintended harms?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll take a little more time to give a detailed answer on this, Mr. Speaker. When we work with the municipality police forces, Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that public safety and community well-being is at the top of every decision made here, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to public safety. We don't want crime to take a stronghold on our communities, Mr. Speaker, so that's why we're taking the preventative approach, Mr. Speaker, preventative approach and education, Mr. Speaker, and we will encourage presentations in schools, will be part of the ongoing approach, Mr. Speaker, to preventative measures, Mr. Speaker, when dealing with crime. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government, as a primary funder of post-secondary institutions, has an important role not only in ensuring post-secondary institutions comply with statutory requirements, but also in funding initiatives and programs to ensure our university and colleges can meet those duties and support students. A question to the Premier. What funding and resources is your government providing to post-secondary institutions to assist them in combating and responding to sexual violence?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I will have to take that question under advisement to get an answer back to the member, Mr. Speaker. I know we have numerous agreements in place with both Holland College, College de Lisle, and the University of Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, but I would have to go through to the particulars to get the answer that I think that the honourable member is deserving of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Post-Secondary Institution Sexual Violence Policies Act requires institutions to, quote, appropriately accommodate the needs of students enrolled at the post-secondary institution who are affected by sexual violence, end quote. Last week, CBC reported on a former UPEI student who was so traumatized by an incident of sexual violence that she has had to change institutions and alter her career path, which on its face suggests a failure by UPEI to provide adequate accommodation. A question to the Premier. What oversight and scrutiny is government providing with respect to the appropriate accommodation of students affected by sexual violence?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that's a very good and important question, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the full details of the incident, Mr. Speaker, nor would I be at liberty to discuss a lot of it. I do know that within the framework of our agreements, Mr. Speaker, that we ask our partners to uphold, Mr. Speaker, what they are supposed to be upholding. I don't want to be, and I don't mean to be intentionally vague, I don't have the answer for what you're asking here right now, but I will try to get that back to you, Honourable Member. It's an important topic, Mr. Speaker, and I know in talking to both, in particular, the President of Holland College and the President of the University of Prince Edward Island, that they are committed to providing the best possible campuses, Mr. Speaker, for safe education. I'll need to get a fuller brief, though, Mr. Speaker, and we'll bring it back to the House as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sexual violence policies are supposed to protect students, not fail them. The Minister of Education has the ability to direct a review of a sexual violence policy. A question to the Premier. Does your government intend to request a review of UPEI's sexual violence policy?
Honourable Premier.
And once again, Mr. Speaker, I would like the opportunity to confer with the department officials just to find out what they might know a little bit more in-depthly than I do on this particular matter. I wish the Honourable Minister was here. Perhaps she might have a little bit more information. But once again, Mr. Speaker, this is a serious, serious issue. I think campus and university life, Mr. Speaker, in the pursuit of education needs to be such that you can do so safely and have only positive memories, Mr. Speaker. And it's very disturbing to hear this case and knowing that the individual involved will not have positive memories of education in this province, Mr. Speaker. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. But I'll report back to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago, I raised concerns in this House regarding persons with dementia residing in Unit 9. I was contacted by multiple families expressing concerns about the housing for persons with dementia at Unit 9. When dementia patients are located in Unit 9, not only does the patient not receive the proper dementia care, those seeking critical psychiatric services have less beds available to access. It's a discouraging and sad cycle that must be fixed. Question to the Minister of Health. Are dementia patients still located within Unit 9 at the QEH, or have they since been relocated, and if so, where?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with regard, I know that the member has brought this forward previously, referencing the Prince Edward Home, but dementia patients had been transferred over there, and restorative care, with the great assistance of home care, back out into the community. With regard to the exact numbers, Mr. Speaker, I don't have them right in front of me. I will bring them back for the House and for the Honourable Member, though, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Well, you're the Minister of Health. This is an important file. You know these questions are coming, and there's no greater people to look at and make sure that you have the numbers. And I remain concerned for the welfare of these persons with dementia. One common concern heard with people with dementia in Unit 9 was the lack of programming and direct patient care. Establishing a consistent home-like environment, following routines, and long-term staffing relationships are all said to be beneficial for persons with dementia. And right now, none of those exist at the QEH. Question to the Minister of Health. Do you believe shuffling dementia patients between multiple hospital units could potentially have a negative effect on those patients themselves and immense stress on their families?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will say, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that I'll never apologize for not having exact information right in front of me. I am never going to put myself or provide information to the House here, to the legislature, that I'm not 100% sure is accurate. So again, Mr. Speaker, I make no apologies to the member for not having that right in front of me. I will bring it back as I had indicated. Mr. Speaker, though, you look at some of the new initiatives under the budget, Health PEI, for example, and certainly the details will be rolled out on this as we do bring forward the budget onto the floor of the House here. But a new dementia team, we're looking at additional funding, substantial additional funding, Mr. Speaker, for home care, for geriatric care. And when we look at our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, we have to look at all aspects of it, whether it's restorative care, whether it's dementia care, whether it's acute care, whether it's our primary care providers, Mr. Speaker. So I do appreciate the questions, and with regard to the original question, I will bring that information back, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Charlottetown, West Royalty.
This sounds like a stump speech, and these are islanders we're talking about with dementia that have been displaced for a long time. The minister can't keep track of 7 patients in the QEH and can't give the information on the spot. That is discouraging. Okay, we have to treat these people with respect and dignity. They are not in Unit 9. They have been moved around. A couple of weeks ago, I was told that some persons with dementia were moved into Unit 3 at the QEH while they were awaiting long-term care placements. However, over the weekend, we heard that PEI had its first COVID-19 hospitalizations, and those cases would be handled by Unit 3 at the QEH, and there could be dementia patients in there. Question to the Minister of Health. Were the patients previously housed in Unit 3 with dementia relocated, and if so, where are they?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And that is a question that, yes, when I heard originally, was notified originally with regard to the first COVID-19 admission to hospital, it was one of the first questions that I put forward, was just to make sure that all staff, that all other patients in the units are within their healthcare facilities, that they are safe as possible. And Mr. Speaker, certainly the honourable member references the importance of islanders, of right from tip to tip. I do not disagree with them in any way, shape or form on that, Mr. Speaker. But again, we have to take our directions from the professionals, from the ones that know the best, for the ones that work in the system day in, day out, unlike myself or unlike the honourable member, to make sure that the most appropriate service, that the most appropriate care, Mr. Speaker, is provided. And that is provided by our healthcare professionals, our professionals that I personally have great faith in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
And your job is to fight for them. You don't even know where they are. You don't know that they're safe. It appears to be no clear plan for persons with dementia. Instead, government continues to shuffle people around, hoping the problem will solve itself. We now have seen COVID-19 hospitalizations and PEI further inability in government's ability to house people with dementia in various hospital units. The throne speech contained a promise to create a multidisciplinary dementia team. However, like many other things in this government, we have no details on what that exactly will be or what it will do. Question to the minister: when will this team be operational, and how will they contribute to the increasing capacity for proper long-term care beds in Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do know that they are safe. And how do I know that they're safe? Is because I, unlike the honourable member, have great faith in our healthcare professionals, by the ones that are delivering these services day in and day out. And I will continue to, unlike the member, I will continue to have faith in our great frontline healthcare workers. And personally, Mr. Speaker, I take offense to the honourable member stating that these individuals, that these great islanders that are in our facilities are not safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Well, I know for a fact you don't have proper security on the places that you move those, Minister. So check your stats and come back here. And I'm not going after healthcare workers. I'm going after you for you doing your job, okay, and knowing where these people are. On another note, we look at the mismanagement of the government's handling of Deacon House. We have seen Deacon House deteriorate significantly to the point it now must receive extensive renovations or a full replacement. We have heard many conflicting reports of this government on the status of Deacon House, causing distress to islanders who seek harm reduction services that are offered there. Question to the Minister of Health: will you clearly tell islanders the status of Deacon House? Will it be renovated? Is it closing? What are the plans for this important facility?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will reiterate what I heard from the member was that he does not have faith in our frontline healthcare workers, that he does not keep them safe. So I'll leave that. With regard to Deacon House, Mr. Speaker, you look at the initiatives with regard to mental health and addictions that our government is undertaking, whether it's with regard to the mental health campus, whether it's with regard to the PEI Centre for Mental Wellbeing, whether it's with regard to the appointment of an Assistant Deputy Minister for Mental Health and Addictions. We are moving forward, Mr. Speaker, and I do agree with the member that, yes, Deacon House, it needs work. Either it needs to be replaced or it needs upgrades. And it was one of the areas that I went through when I was sworn into this position as Minister, Mr. Speaker. And I may not agree with the member on a lot of things, but I do with him on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, your second supplementary.
Whether government decides to significantly renovate or replace Deacon House, it is clear that an improvement to the facility will result in a disruption of the services offered there. This facility offers overnight shelters for adult males experiencing substance addiction or chemical dependency, a service that is not offered elsewhere. I have heard from different people who themselves sought service at Deacon House, and they are concerned about the possible disruption of service there. Question to the Minister of Health: how will you ensure the important services offered at Deacon House are not halted or discontinued as a result of the facility renovations or replacements?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. The member is right. Deacon House is open, as I understand it, from 7 in the evening until 7 the following morning. But I think, Mr. Speaker, too, but we do have to look across the board, across different departments within our government, the initiatives that have been taken, initiatives such as Smith Lodge, such as the Outreach Centre. And when Deacon House actually was closed earlier this year, late last year, because of heating breakdowns, we did have, as a government, in conjunction with the Department of Social Development and Housing, we did have that alternative facility to be able to move these individuals into, Mr. Speaker. And that is something that as government that we have and will continue to endeavor to do so, is work across department lines so that we can complement each other as we provide services to Islanders, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today my question is to the Minister of Finance. In the Minister's opinion, is the pandemic over?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable member, I think anyone who's been listening to the news and look across Canada, the pandemic is far from over.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course the pandemic is not over, Mr. Speaker. Canada continues to struggle, and many people remain very worried for the safety and well-being of their families. Last April, Atlantic Lottery was pressing the Minister to join their home gaming scheme. On April 29th, the Minister responded to Atlantic Lottery by letter, and I will quote this letter. I will contact you after the pandemic if we think it makes sense for Prince Edward Island to join the other shareholders in offering new products. And I will table this later, as I said. My question to the Minister: why did you move to join this home gaming scheme in the middle of the pandemic?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Honourable Member, we haven't joined any scheme, and it's not a scheme. It's a very well thought out and planned way for Islanders to more safely gamble online. We're looking at the details right now, and we will continue to do that to ensure that when we move forward, it will be the right decision for Islanders. It's not a scheme. That's something that the honourable members across tried earlier. A scheme. This is through Atlantic Lottery Corporation, which is owned by the 4 Atlantic provinces, and I will ensure, the honourable member, that we will do all the due diligence we need to do to ensure that we do this in a safe way for Islanders.
Honourable Leader of the Third Party, your second supplementary.
Well, you can choose your words however you want, scheme or plan. In December of 2020, hey, I'm just repeating what she said, okay? Do I have the floor, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah.
Thank you. In December 2020, the Cabinet authorized this plan. Of course, we can't call it a scheme, it's a plan. In fact, the order in council issued by Cabinet permitted the province to develop and conduct the home gaming plan. I will table that document as well. The pandemic was certainly not over in December of 2020, so why did you change your mind? Was it the promise of increased revenues?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Honourable Member, it did come to Cabinet. We are exploring the option. It has not been implemented. You cannot go online with Atlantic Lottery Corporation in Prince Edward Island as a Prince Edward Island resident and gamble. So that has not happened yet. We will continue to work with Atlantic Lottery to ensure when we move forward with this, that it's done in a safe way. And honourable member, yes, it will increase the revenues from Prince Edward Island. Some of those revenues, the $100 million in Atlantic Canada that is leaving to offshore gaming right now, and we will be happy to ensure that Islanders who gamble online for entertainment will make the decision to choose Atlantic Lottery when and if we do it. Thank you.
Honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With spring here now and May and June coming shortly, we have a number of, I guess, major milestones for young adults, grade 12s that are graduating high school, prom and graduation. Premier, last year you confirmed for the class of 2020 that they would have a prom and graduation, even if it looked a little different. Will you make this same commitment to the class of 2021?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, absolutely.
The Honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess the issue is that I have a number of students and parents that are coming to me saying that, I guess you could say, the public schools branch doesn't want to touch it, doesn't want to deal with prom. And I guess my point being is that with vaccines rolling out now, and perhaps by mid-June, we could see everyone on PEI who wants the first dose to have one, and mandatory masks. So perhaps there's a chance that these celebrations could look a little different this time. Premier, will you look at working with the Minister of Education to make sure that schools can have the financial resources and the human resources to make these celebrations happen?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for raising this. I think when we, as difficult as it is in this time, as we gaze toward the end of June, by that time we should have 80% of our adult population with at least one vaccination dose, which should put us in a better position to do some of the things that the honourable member is suggesting. This time last year, I became a bit of a reluctant expert on the difference between prom and graduation ceremonies and who's responsible for which at each school, Mr. Speaker. So in terms of, if I remember correctly, graduation is orchestrated by the staff at the schools, and that will continue to be the place. Proms are more some teacher guidance, but some parents and others, Mr. Speaker. All that to say, we will do everything we possibly can to make sure that both events can be held, Mr. Speaker, safely, even if they're different. And like last year, if some resources are required to make that look a little bit different and a little safer, we would be happy to entertain that, Mr. Speaker, absolutely.
Montague-Kilmuir, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the issue is that, you know, some schools like Charlottetown Rural and Colonel Grey never usually host, say, prom at the school because of the significant number of students that they have graduating. But rural schools like Morel, Surrey, Montague, they actually host these events at the schools, even if parents might organize it. But they're being told that they can't host them at the schools, which I don't quite understand why. I'm assuming it comes down to health protocols. Perhaps the schools don't want to touch it. But I feel perhaps this far out, you know, to say that the students can't have this opportunity might be a little short-sighted. If you know, if we can wear masks, if we're going to be vaccinated. I know that we won't really know until that time. But Premier, will you work with the Minister of Education to perhaps take a look at this again and see if it's a possibility that students can host their prom at their respective schools?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I've got to admit that I'm unaware that any directive was given in that regard, so the honourable member might be a little bit better informed on that than I am, Mr. Speaker. But I will go back. I will talk to senior staff. I will talk with the minister, Mr. Speaker. It's, I said, one of the great things about this time of year is we get close looking toward the end of the season, the school semester, and those who have worked so hard want to be able to get recognized with those who they've built a friendship with, Mr. Speaker. It's the proudest and best days of my life, and I remember it still, although they're 30-some years away now. It was a wonderful time, and I want that again for these students, Mr. Speaker. So yes, we will go back and see where those discussions are and see what we could do to make sure that graduation and prom are held across the board, Mr. Speaker, for all schools in the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Summerside Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, young islanders have suffered a real loss with COVID, and youth employment remains down. Applications from employers have been high for the Jobs for Youth program. Businesses want to hire young people, so let's invest in them. Question to the Minister of Fisheries and Communities. Can you advise this House on what percentage of the Jobs for Youth applications that have been brought in can expect to receive a funded position?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Communities and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll have to take that question under advisement and come back when I will do that. Thank you.
The honourable member from Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the same minister. Will you increase the investment in the Jobs for Youth program to ensure all eligible businesses that have applied will receive a position so that we can support businesses and young islanders at the same time?
The honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I had a conversation with staff and we just specifically for that, and we talked about if we have the same uptake as we did last year, this year, will we look at it? And we are considering that. Thank you.
The honourable member from Summerside Wilmot, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jobs for Youth is a great program, and in addition to it, we need to make sure that we're creating job opportunities for young people that go beyond August. Question to the same minister. What will what will your employment development agency do to provide job opportunities for young people that last beyond the summer?
The honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
You know, Mr. Speaker, that's a good question, but I want to say that the Jobs for Youth program is well received around this island. And, it's really, since we revamped it last year and now putting the actual employer in the driver's seat where they can go out, apply for a position, get approved by the department, and then go out into the sector and have the conversation directly with students is a great program, and it's a program that we will look at, and if we can employ every student through the existing funding, or if we have to look at more funding to help islanders, especially during these times with the pandemic, and ensuring our small businesses have the employees necessary to survive and move forward, then I'm prepared to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. The honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to highlight our renewed and continued support toward a Team Canada approach to getting through this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Never before has it been more important than it is now in my estimation. I know the past few days, Mr. Speaker, have brought with them some very difficult news for islanders, and also in knowing that we're in the midst nationally of a third wave of COVID-19, where we're seeing infections growing at a faster rate in our country than they have at any time in the past 13 months, Mr. Speaker. It's a worrisome time for islanders, and it's a worrisome time for Canadians. The news over the last few days, both here in PEI and across the country, isn't easy news to hear, Mr. Speaker. It isn't easy news when I first hear it, but especially given that our compliance with public health measures has been the best in the country, and I would suspect among some of the best in the world, Mr. Speaker. It made that news even more difficult. But, Mr. Speaker, as we've come to know that firsts of this pandemic are difficult, the first case, the first lockdown, the first variant, the first outbreak in a school or workplace, and this past weekend, Mr. Speaker, the news that we've had our first hospitalization. These are difficult times, of course, Mr. Speaker, and throughout it all, Islanders have been brave. Islanders have been strong, Islanders have been resilient, and we've gotten through it, Mr. Speaker, by working together as a province. And that is extended to the approach we have taken across the board in this country, Mr. Speaker, with the Team Canada approach. While shocking to some the last few days, it is an indication of what is taking place across the country, and the further reality that even though we're doing very, very well, we're not immune and we're not protected totally from COVID-19 and its variants, Mr. Speaker. It's a long haul. We're tired of it. I'm showing the signs of it myself of how tired this is, Mr. Speaker, but much work remains and we have to dig in. And our way through this has been working together. Our way through this as a country has been working together. So, Mr. Speaker, when I got a call on the weekend from both the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario asking for some help, they're going through a difficult time. I know that is a concerning issue. It's one that we raised in question period, and it's an important topic to be talking about. I committed only, Mr. Speaker, to my colleagues that we will try to do everything we can to assist Ontario, while at the same time they all recognize that we need to be doing everything we can to maintain the health and safety of Islanders here, Mr. Speaker. So in spite of the challenges that we have, we've asked our staff to look at what we could provide, and to the extent that we can help, Mr. Speaker, we will, and that is what I relayed to the Prime Minister as part of being a team member of Team Canada, Mr. Speaker. It can't be lost on us here, even though we've been insulated a bit from some of the realities across the country, but what we're dealing with here in the last 13 months is the most difficult situation our country has faced since the Second World War, Mr. Speaker. No Canadian has been spared. No matter where you live, you've been impacted in some way, shape, or form, Mr. Speaker. And I said yesterday, and I wanted to reiterate here again today, Mr. Speaker, that it would be very easy, given all we've been through, to revert to a protectionist instinct, Mr. Speaker, to develop a me first and only me attitude, Mr. Speaker. But we haven't done that as a province, Mr. Speaker, and we haven't done that as Canadians. And I think that is as much the story of COVID as anything that we have undertaken in the last 13 months, Mr. Speaker. I think we should be immensely proud of that, Mr. Speaker, and we need to continue to protect that. In the face of difficulty, Mr. Speaker, and uncertainty, we have to remember that the residents of Ontario, many of them are our friends, they're our family, Mr. Speaker, they're former Islanders and they're fellow Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and we've been asked to see if we can do a little bit to help. And that's what we're trying to respond to, Mr. Speaker. Just like I would expect if I were to make a call to the Prime Minister, to the Premier of Ontario, or to the Premier of any province in this country to ask for help for PEI, they would do the same, Mr. Speaker. That's part of the duty we have as being part of this our country, Mr. Speaker, and it's also part of who we are as Islanders, Mr. Speaker, that kindness, that generosity, that humanity that's even more important, Mr. Speaker, today than it's ever been before. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report, as I said in question period, that we've had 8 healthcare providers express and a number of nursing students inquire about offering help. Over the coming days, officials from PEI will work with Ontario officials in how, when, or if these resources could be able to be assisted, what is expected of them, Mr. Speaker, and all of the details that go into such an endeavour. Having a dozen individuals or so, Mr. Speaker, express help doesn't surprise me. It makes me proud as an Islander that they would do it. They're the bravest of the brave, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, and when it's needed most, like yourself, Mr. Speaker, a former first responder, when the chips are down, you're running toward the fire when everyone's running away from it, Mr. Speaker. That's brave, that's courageous, and I'm proud of those on the front lines, Mr. Speaker, who've expressed an interest to help our brothers and sisters in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. It's service above self, and that's what it is to be a Canadian, Mr. Speaker. So to the extent that we can help in this difficult time, we will do so in knowing that it might just be a little bit of help, Mr. Speaker, but they'll be big in heart and they'll be big in effort, Mr. Speaker, because that's who we are as Islanders. And finally, Mr. Speaker, when you're part of a team, Mr. Speaker, success comes from when every person on that team is working to make a positive contribution, Mr. Speaker, and that's what it takes to be successful. I play for Team Canada, Mr. Speaker, and I'm extremely proud to do so. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. One of the things I love so much about our island is how people come together to help their friends and neighbours in times of need. And right at the very beginning of the proceedings today, we talked about the fact that this is Volunteer Week, and there's not a day goes by without a fundraiser or some kind of community event here on Prince Edward Island where folks come together to help fellow Islanders. And in many ways, that's the essence of what community is about. It's recognising the connections that we all have to each other and acting on that shared sense of mutual care and concern for each other's well-being. I like to think that governing is an expression of that same shared sense of duty. You know, we all pay taxes, albeit varying amounts, to provide services that we don't necessarily all access, at least, again, not equally. And that pooling of community resources to create, whether it's universal health care or a schooling system for all children, are good examples of that community spirit that is governance at its best. Health and education, of course, fall within provincial jurisdiction, but a large amount of the dollars that come to pay for those services come from the federal government, or if put another way, they come from all Canadians. And we're bound together, of course, at all sorts of different levels. We're bound together in our families, in our communities, in our province, nationally. And COVID has shown us we are one collective community on planet Earth. The entire rest of the world, in many ways, is connected to us in ways that we sometimes see and sometimes don't. In our nation, that sense of connection has always been there. The size and the sheer geographic size of Canada and the diversity of the population here make it perhaps more challenging than some other countries to maintain those bonds that tie us together. But there are countless examples of how our federation has successfully managed to maintain that sense of community that sense of togetherness despite our geographic enormity. And at this time when some parts of Canada are indeed in dire straits, as the Premier has just expressed, and he's expressed in media and publicly before, we instinctively want to reach out and help in any way that we can. What's different and what's perplexing about this particular situation, this particular emergency, is that it is everywhere. It's a pandemic. It affects everyone. And while an ice storm or a hurricane or some other disaster may affect one small part of our country, everywhere else is living under pretty much normal circumstances. That's not the case at this moment in time. And that makes for really tough decisions. That makes for hard ethical and political choices with no clear right or wrong answers. And I, for one, appreciate how our Premier has walked through this most delicate of pathways, and how that need to maintain local capacity and services for all islanders has to be weighed against this desire that we all have, this intrinsic desire to help our fellow Canadians. But we must be allowed to express our concerns about the potential lack of resources here on Prince Edward Island. We are indeed all in this together, and we must be willing to raise our eyes and widen our gaze and to see where help is called for, where it's needed. But we also have to recognize that our first duty is here to Islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to send out a great big kudos to those healthcare workers and students that inquired or checked out the possibility of going to Ontario to help. I'd also like to echo the comments made by the Premier that we as Islanders will always seek to help our fellow Canadian provinces when they are in need. And, you know, as the Premier indicated, we are a team, and you know what team players do, we all work together for a common goal. As we watch the situation in Ontario become increasingly concerning in the last week, there has been a request for assistance by provinces that have the ability to do so to help. We all know our healthcare system is strained on a good day, and now that we are experiencing our first COVID hospitalizations, putting further stress is already on a strained system. We already have a situation in PEI where if some nurses are sick, it may disrupt some services. While we may be unable to offer much in additional healthcare personnel, I am pleased to see the Premier and his government examining all potential options to offer assistance to our friends in Ontario. We know that throughout history in PEI, any time we have requested the assistance of other provinces in the Federation, they always sought to offer us whatever they could. I believe we should always return the favour, providing doing so does not inhibit our ability to offer services to all Islanders. It is my hope that we can, some way, help provide valuable assistance to Ontario while also ensuring a full continuation of health services here on PEI. Ontario and PEI, as the Premier had said, have many connections. I have many cousins still living in Ontario. They've lived up there. Haven't seen them for quite some time during this pandemic. And we also have lots of friends up there. And as an Islander and all Islanders, I wish all Ontarians all the best in this difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In PEI's history, we have never before closed our borders or put into place a pre-travel approval process for anyone wanting to come to PEI. Never before have we required people to isolate in their homes and had peace officers working to ensure they comply with the public health orders. Islanders are used to being free flow of friends, family, and visitors going to and from the island without any restrictions. But that's what we had to do to respond to COVID-19, and that's what we still have to do. Yesterday, Dr. Morrison and Premier King made the difficult but necessary announcement that we will be strengthening our border measures. As Minister of Justice and Public Safety, I would like to take a moment to recognize the exceptional work of public safety has done alongside the public health throughout this pandemic. The women and men who work with the office are on the front lines, behind the scenes, to support the Chief Public Health Office. It's a small team of conservation officers who follow up the public health complaints, make sure people are isolating when they're supposed to, and do random house calls as well. As of yesterday, 8 conservation officers have followed up on 653 complaints visited 1,164 homes randomly for those in isolation, warned 205 people, have issued 140 charges with law enforcement. It is also a dedicated team of over 40 public safety officials that have reviewed over 27,516 pre-travel approval requests since COVID-19 began. I still remember within that first 24 hours that the pre-travel approval process started, they received over 1,000 applications. The public safety team has never hesitated to adopt and respond to what public health needs for our provincial response. When Dr. Morrison and her team have needed support, public safety has always been quick to ask, how can we help? This is the kind of teamwork is what led us to be successful, and I know the public health and public safety will continue to be united to fight against the virus. Even though the border screening was new to everyone this time last year, public safety has been recognized as leader in the area by other governments across Canada. Staff are ramping up again with the recent changes announced and with the expected influx of people coming to PEI when it is safe to do so again. In fact, the role of the provincial response is more critical than ever. And then through it all, the team has done this difficult job with a professionalism and thoughtfulness. They have found the delicate balance of managing the risk of bringing the virus into our province and finding a way to welcome people to our beautiful island. Mr. Speaker, I hope that all members will join me in recognizing the hard work of public safety staff have done and will continue to do to keep Islanders safe on this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, I'd agree with the Minister that we should recognise the hard work that's been done by our officials here on Prince Edward Island. I think we also have to recognise all the hard work that Islanders themselves have put in and the sacrifices they've made and the price they've paid to buy this little safe haven that we have here in the world. And the recent travel restriction announcements have come rather abruptly, and already I'm being contacted by folks who have been stranded after selling a home elsewhere and planning to come here. So the department and the officials have also been very responsive to that in the past, and I do hope that they continue to consider these unique cases as we move forward as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while many Islanders were disappointed to hear enhanced restrictions put in place yesterday, we ultimately understand they are to keep us all safe. We are seeing cases rise across the country with particular concern regarding variants of the virus which are more harmful and harder to contain. While vaccinations continue to roll out here in PEI and across the country, we simply need a bit more time before we can begin opening up and welcoming visitors again. Islanders have done a great job over the last year combating COVID-19, and I know many were disappointed. They will have to delay reunions with family and friends, but we ultimately must ensure our safety here on PEI first and foremost. We have worked so hard this past year on PEI, we just need to keep it up for a little while longer, and we will be rewarded with greater freedoms in the end. It is my hope that after this short pause, we will be positioned to enjoy a summer filled with family, friends, and great memories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of minister statements. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table youth voting survey results, which consists of more consultation done with Island youth on lowering the voting age, and I move, seconded by Charlottetown Belvedere, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The honourable leader of the third party.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table on April 29, 2020, letter stating the Minister of Finance wasn't interested in expanding online gaming until after the pandemic. And I move, second by the honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbank.
Shall it carry? Carry. The honourable leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a document on December 22nd, ordering Council authorizing the PEI Lotteries Commission to develop, organize, undertake, conduct, and manage an enhanced digital platform to be operated on behalf of PEI by ALC. And I move, second by the honourable member from Larry Inverness.
Shall I carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the ExploreNet progress update as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition requested. And I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall I carry?
Carry.
Anyone else? No? Reports by committees. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules, Regulations, Private Bills and Privileges, and following the receipt of a report on motion number 96, petitions and other updates of the said committee on Thursday, April 8th, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot, that the report of the committee be adopted following the reading of the report and recommendations as follows. Your committee is reporting on its activities since the committee last reported in November 2020. Since then, your committee has met 3 times to consider motion 96, which referred several matters to this committee. Also included in this report are recommendations relating to the routine of presenting and receiving petitions, as well as changes required with the passing of the new Legislative Assembly Act. Mr. Speaker, the first part of the report relates to the matters referred to the committee in motion 96, which asks the committee to review timelines for answers to written questions, written executive responses for committee reports, and the referral of annual reports to standing committees. The committee is recommending that answers to written questions shall be returned within 45 calendar days. If it is not possible to provide an answer within 45 days, the Minister must file a provisional return indicating that the answer is not ready, the reason for the delay, and the date upon which the information will be provided. Executive responses to committee reports are currently outlined in Rule 110.9. A written executive response shall be tabled in the House during the next seasonal sitting following the adoption of the committee report. In order to facilitate this existing rule, the committee proposes that, following the House sitting, the Office of the Clerk forwards a list of all committee reports tabled during the sitting to the Executive Council Office as relevant. Regarding the referral of annual reports from departments, agencies and Crown corporations to standing committees, we are not recommending rule changes at this time. Standing committees are empowered to examine matters as decided by a majority of committee members, as outlined in Rule 94.1, and may examine annual reports as they choose. Part 2 of the report, Mr. Speaker, relates to the routine of presenting and receiving petitions. At this time, the committee is recommending a rule change that requires government to respond to petitions tabled under this routine within 14 calendar days. If the House is sitting, the response can be tabled in the House under the same routine. If the House is not sitting, the response may be filed with the Office of the Clerk. The topic of electronic petitions has been discussed by the committee over the last several months, and under Recommendation 5, the committee is indicating that with the adoption of this report, we will continue to pursue the matter and will report back to the House with the necessary rule changes to provide an update on the platform proposed in the next sitting. To clarify, electronic petitions will not be available with the adoption of this report, but we look forward to continuing our work and reporting back this fall. Part 3 of the report relates to the necessary changes due to the passing of the new Legislative Assembly Act last fall. Recommendation 6 relates to the housekeeping changes required to the rules, including replacing the name of the Standing Committee on Legislative Management to the new name of Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management, a change to Rule 9.1 that requires the House to meet within 30 days after Declaration Day for the purpose of electing a Speaker, previously set at 60 days, updating Rule 79 with a list of officers of the House, and updating Rule 95.1b, which is the mandate of the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management. Recommendation 7 makes changes to Rules 65, 66, and 67 and relates to Section 46.2 of the Legislative Assembly Act, which states, any bill relating to the Legislative Assembly or the administration of its offices shall be committed to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management for consideration and may be brought before the Legislative Assembly in accordance with the procedures for public bills in the rules of the Legislative Assembly. The change to Rule 65 indicates that bills related to the Legislative Assembly and introduced by a member on behalf of the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management may be brought to the House in accordance with the same procedures as public bills. The new proposed Rule 66 combines the previous Rule 66 and 67 and provides the outline for the general process on public and private member bills. The committee has proposed a new Rule 67, which outlines the procedures for bills related to the Legislative Assembly. This means that any bills related to the Legislative Assembly or the administration of its offices shall be committed to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management for consideration. This can happen in two ways. If the bills are introduced by a member on behalf of the committee, the bill will be ordered for second reading if the bill has already been considered by that committee and been agreed to by a majority of its members. Or any member may introduce a bill that relates to the Assembly or the management of its offices, and that bill will stand automatically referred to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management after first reading for the committee's consideration. To conclude, with the adoption of the report, arrangements will be made to immediately update and reprint the rules of the Legislative Assembly. Until paper copies are printed, the updated rules will be posted on the Assembly's website. These changes will take effect immediately upon adoption of this report in the House, Mr. Speaker. I'll leave it there.
Is there anyone else to speak to the committee report? No? Shall it carry? Introduction of government bills. Government motions. Orders of the day, government. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Honourable Premier that the first order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 1, consideration of the estimates in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Honourable Premier that this House do now resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the grant supplied to Her Majesty.
Shall carry. The Honourable Member of Tingnish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
The House is now in the Committee of the Whole House to consider the grant of supply to Her Majesty. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Honourable members, we are continuing with Tourism PEI, page 40. The section Golf Courses has been read and is presently under debate. Please state your name and position for Hansard.
Shannon Burke, Director of Finance for Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much and welcome.
Thanks.
Are there any questions on this section? Shall it carry? Total corporate services, $9,430,600. Shall it carry? Strategic initiatives, strategy and evaluation. Appropriations provided for the strategic planning, industry investment, evaluation, and research services. Administration, $7,700. Material supplies and services, $5,600. Professional services, $293,000. Salaries, $688,300. Travel and training, $5,600. Grants, $3,569,100. Total strategy and evaluation, $4,569,300. Shall this section carry? Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair.
So under this section, you mentioned that you have a strategic plan that's in the works. Is that to cover tourism PEI as well, or is there a separate strategic plan for this?
There's a separate one for tourism. So the plan we're working on now is for the office itself, and the strategic plan for tourism we have this year and what it looks like, and then we're looking at the 5-year plan, which will be drafted as well.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And is that strategic plan so this year is already complete? Is that accurate?
This year, yes. Yep.
And is that available online for Islanders to see?
I believe it is. If not, I'll table it here.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
I'm great. Thanks, Chair.
Charlottetown Brighton.
On the strategic plan for tourism, what have you learned from it? Has the government identified any policies or regulations that have been hampering the PEI tourism?
Well, I think the big thing we've learned is it's tough to plan. You look at the plan we've put in place this year. You look what we're dealing with in COVID right now with the unknown. So that's been the biggest challenge is the not known. So you have to have more than just one plan in place. So obviously this year we're hoping Atlantic bubble. We also have a plan in place depending on vaccinations and different markets we could potentially go to, depending on how this pandemic goes. But it's still the unknown. That's been the biggest challenge for myself and the department, as well as all tourism operators, is the unknown.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Well, I understand the uncertainties. They're definitely severe. So speaking about planning, I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about the successful you plan had last year to spend $1.5 million on bringing I think the softball tournament, yeah? No, not softball.
Soccer.
Soccer,
yep.
yeah.
So we had great uptake. That went better than we could have ever dreamt for. Obviously, there was a lot of anxiety because that was a pretty big endeavor we took under, especially with COVID, and everybody put their work into it to make it a great success. The economic spin-off directly was a little over $5 million. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. 5.1. People went to work, just things behind the scenes that you don't think of, but the busing for all the soccer, the foods, the restaurants that were delivered. There was 3 meals a day from different restaurants that were delivered right to the door. The souvenir side of it, something you wouldn't think about. We had a platform design that would allow these soccer players to access souvenirs delivered right to their door as well. So it went better than we could have expected. We made a great contact, and hopefully when we can get COVID behind us, we could possibly look at doing another event of some sort.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like COVID is going to be behind us very soon. So what are you planning for this summer that isn't? Is there anything you're planning that isn't dependent on whether the bubble is going to be open or not? Or
As far as events go, you mean?
any kind of tourism activity?
Yeah, so we're going back to our local campaign, which was a great success. Our Islanders definitely supported our local businesses during the pandemic. Like I say, Atlantic Canada, that's where our focus is right now. By the end of at some point, I believe it's the end of June, early July, we're supposed to have 80% of our population vaccinated. As the rest of the country's rolling out vaccines as well, it would be nice to be able to welcome some of those visitors that are vaccinated at some point this summer, but it's still the unknown, and we just got to take one day at a time.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you. So that, did I hear you say correctly, you may have take advantage of vaccinated people being able to attend, whether they're from the province or...
It's definitely in discussions now, but like I say, we've got to see how this COVID continues over the next few months and to see how many Canadians are vaccinated, but it's definitely something that we're considering and we'll look at when the time comes.
Charlottetown Brighton.
So issues like a vaccination pass isn't really in your department, but are you promoting that within government so you have something to
Certainly. So during this whole pandemic, our number one thing we followed is the health and safety of all islanders, and that's what we've used through every decision we've made. The discussions, for sure, we've seen our tourism operators, they've been hit the hardest out of anyone, so we need to continue to show support in any way we can do so forth. We will. So this is exactly what some of the discussions are, but at the end of the day, health and safety have to come first, and when we do get there, we'll certainly allow people that are vaccinated. But when that time comes, I'm not sure.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Cornwall Meadowbank.
Just so your strategy is completed and you're going to table that strategy, who conducted the strategy?
That would have been done. 2031.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
With correspondence with the board as well, the tourism board.
So and I think I'm in the right spot, but maybe I'm not because we've been away for a week, but the business expansion and product development, which basically is increasing by 2.6 million in 2021. What is the large increase going towards?
Just give us
Is it
one.
in the handouts?
Yeah, I thought so. Maybe I'm in the wrong spot. I think I am, actually. But I have a follow-up, Chair. We have question? So the federal budget is 500 million to tourism, and our share of that's likely what?
Your guess is as good as mine. We're only guessing at this point. Until we have some more details, we would just be guessing at this point. But the talk is it could be in the vicinity of $5 million.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
Which isn't a whole lot.
Not a whole lot at all.
Yeah, just you've seen Matt Jelly in the news today, and there may be some gaps for some of those products that we have on Prince Edward Island, which we don't have an abundance of, but we do have products that there may be gaps on. Is the provincial government willing to step up and ensure those mainstays remain open, or at least don't go under to some extent?
So there's certainly been a lot of work done over the last 7-8 months on what this could look like without knowing what the federal budget was going to be in it, right? So the number one thing we've heard from tourism operators is the wage subsidy was crucial. So as good as the federal government has been to us, and I couldn't say enough, I was disappointed to see that the wage subsidy in what they're looking to do as early as July is going to be devastating for some of these tourism operators that are going to struggle. There's no doubt about it. So we've always been developing programs. We're developing programs behind the scenes and trying to be proactive of some of these issues that are going to come up. We've gone as far as cost factoring out if we had to help intervene with the wage subsidies, and the initial numbers that are coming back is in the vicinity of $100 million. It's just, it's tremendously high. So I do think what we need to do, though, last budget we would have had contingency in each individual department. Now we have it as a whole in government, which once the finance minister hits the floor she'll be able to talk more, but I do feel that we're going to have to access some of that funds for different programming as the summer goes, because depending on what our summer looks like, tourism operators will need support.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
So, yeah, the 100 million, I'm assuming that takes in all 8 sectors of the tourism industry. But a lot of those sectors are doing very well. That's the other side of it. But there's some that the attractions and the parks that Matt owns and some seasonal roofed accommodations are going to need some help, and that may not be 100 million. But I guess what I'm saying is, I thought 0.4% of the 500 million would come basically to Prince Edward Island based on per capita, so we might end up with a little more than 5 million. So I guess I want to reconfirm that you're willing to ensure that those facilities, to the best of your ability, are going to be looked after.
You said it to the best of our ability, so obviously everything we've done, we've had the resources to do so. We still have resources in place, but we got to make sure that they get us to where we need to be. I do believe the $100 million was on tourism alone. It wasn't all the business sector. I believe there's 4,900 tourism operators on PEI. That would be accommodations, restaurants, and anybody that's affected during tourism, because we did check on the grant side, and that was the number that was used with 4,900. So when you start putting the wage subsidies in there, it's a significant amount, and I'm pretty confident it was in, which I can bring it back, it was close, if not over, 100 million. But I certainly think as we get going, and depending on what our season looks like, we'll do everything in our power to make sure tourism operators survive, and we can focus on the following year.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
That's fine, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. So, Minister, I did have a look, and I do see that the current strategic plan from 2016 to 2021 is online, so I'm assuming you're working on 2022 out the next 5 years.
That's right.
So, I know it's obviously unprecedented times with what's happened to COVID, but is there an operational plan as well that your team goes through to review that, how these strategic goals are actually being implemented and achieved, and a measurement? Is that what the scorecard is that I'm seeing listed here, the report card?
That, I don't know. I'd have to go back to the department to see how they evaluate that. I don't have that answer.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. So as Minister of this area, how do you hold accountable your senior management to see how they're measuring against the strategic plan? Because the strategic plan would be your direction. But how do you
Yes and
hold
no. So the
accountable?
board's a part of that, right? So the board, our tourism board now, do you remember how many are exactly on it, Shannon? A dozen, I believe. So they meet on a regular basis. So they're listening to industry. They're dealing with the RTAs, the chambers, you name it. They're the ones that put the feet on the ground. Developing a lot of what's taking place, and so they're working with my department. Obviously, my department, we have representation on that board as well, which my CEO would be part of them meetings quite often. So it's not that the department is developing themselves. It's really an industry-led strategic plan that there's a lot of work behind the scenes with everybody involved.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, and that I can totally appreciate. And so, just to kind of continue on from what Cornwall Meadowbank was talking about, we've heard obviously concerns within industry right now. Is there currently stakeholder meetings going on with industry in order to, or do you plan to, based on what's just been announced, and what more the province needs to do in order to continue from that?
Yeah, certainly. So really, they've never stopped. There's been collaboration with industry all along, and I think that's why we've been so successful on the programs we've rolled out, is because they've come from industry as a whole. They were telling us where the gaps were between the federal programs, provincial gaps. We've been able to work with them. So there's constantly collaboration on that as well. TIPI has been great to deal with. Obviously, they represent the industry, and I would dare say my department's on the phone every day with TIPI and listening to what's going on and working towards bringing new programs in. High level, we have a couple new programs now that are in the works behind the scenes that will be rolling out here, I'm guessing in the next 30 days, that will help industry out as well. And we'll just pivot with change when we have to, and be ready when we have to.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you. And you made mention of contingency, and I don't see like a contingency bucket in here like there was in the previous budget.
It's no longer in a departmental level itself. It's in finance as a whole. So when the finance minister gets to the floor, she'll be able to tell you more on that.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm good. Thanks, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall the section carry?
Carried.
Regulation and compliance, appropriations provided for management and administration of licensing, signage, and compliance. Administration, $3,600. Material supplies and services, $12,500. Professional services, $5,000. Salaries, $209,900. Travel and training, $8,300. Total regulation and compliance, $239,300. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
French services appropriations provided for projects under the Federal Provincial Promotion of Official Languages Act. Agreement. Grants, $138,900. Total French services, $138,900. Charlottetown Brighton.
I just had a question whether you could just describe a little bit what this grant consists of. It's exactly the same amount every year.
So this is funding that's provided by the federal government through the French language services agreement. And there's a couple of different grants that we provide from this funding. You'll see it in your handout on TPEI-14. So there's website translation services. There's some strategic initiative services and capacity training, all within the French community.
Okay. Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And this relates to the regulation and compliance section, so I believe. So when it comes to short-term rentals, is your department doing anything further in any kind of evaluation or anything as to the impacts of short-term rentals?
So that was the previous section, but I can go back. Yes, so what we've done, we've increased our resources to make sure that any short-term rentals, they are licensed and they are following the rules. Any of them that haven't, we've issued fines and letters sent out to make sure they're in compliance. With COVID, our numbers aren't as accurate now because a lot of these short-term rentals went into long-term rentals. There's been hundreds and hundreds of cancellations that are no longer renting short-term rentals. So once we get back into, I guess, our tourism from different areas coming in and the product coming back on the market, we do have the ability to different program that would allow us to monitor and be more accurate on how many short-term rentals are in the market.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And so previously, I mean, there would have been a lot of cottage businesses, motel businesses, et cetera, that have always been part of, Tourism PEI and to register with TIPI, et cetera. Do you have a sense of how they are being impacted? Like, as you're regulating short-term rentals, are you also kind of assessing what it's done to that traditional market?
Yes, so there's been numerous discussions with that in the past. Now, I'll be honest, we haven't had a lot of dealings with that since COVID has really hit. That was pre-COVID when we were doing some legwork on that. I can go back to the department to see if there's been any more work on that, but it was something we were looking at because we do know some of the hotel operators and larger cottage businesses weren't as busy as they once were. So we were doing a little dive into those numbers.
Mermaid Stratford.
I'm good, thank you, Chair.
Shall section carry?
Carry.
Total strategic initiatives, $4,947,500. Shall carry? Carry. Tourism Marketing Communications, digital marketing appropriations provided for customer relationship management, sales, packaging, and new product development. Administration, $700. Material supplies and services, $600. Salaries, $298,300. Travel and training, $2,000. Integrated tourism solution, $500,000. Total digital marketing, $801,600. Cornwall Meadowbank.
And just the blatant one, the salaries increase. Can you just tell us what position that is?
There was a manager position that was vacant, and the expectation is that will be filled.
Okay.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
And just on your digital marketing, last year you provided free digital marketing for all tourism operators. Are you doing that again this year?
I will go back and confirm, but I believe so.
Cornwall
I'll
Meadowbank.
double check that.
Yeah, I think it was the minimal listing for $85 or something like that
Yep.
you provided. So on the digital marketing, now that there's really no marketing per se, there's more digital marketing than any, I guess I'm gonna ask, is that enough money in your budget to pursue, or maybe your strategy talks about that?
So, you go ahead, Jan. You get some.
So This section relates to Tourism PEI's social media and website, the book PEI. But with respect to advertising outside of the region, that you'll see that in the advertising and PR section.
Okay, I'm fine, Chair, thanks.
You're welcome. Charlottetown Brighton.
This member asked all the questions already. Thank you.
Okay. Shall the section carry? Visitor services, appropriations provided for tourism information, travel, counseling, and visitor information center activities. Administration, $68,000. Material supplies and services, $42,200. Professional services, $19,500. Salary, $784,000. Travel and training, $28,200. Total visitor services, $941,900. Shall the section carry? Charlottetown Brighton.
I was just wondering why there was why the total was so high for the season when there presumably were almost no tourists coming. Yeah.
So the majority of expense in this area is for salaries, and while we continued to keep the visitor centers open, and while they weren't as busy as normal, a lot of the staff were redeployed to CPHO, so we continued to pay their salaries while they were answering questions on the phone lines.
Okay. Charlottetown Brighton.
That explains it. Thank you.
Shall the section carry? Carry. Advertising and public relations. Appropriations provided to market Prince Edward Island tourism in the areas of advertising creative, advertising buy, and production, web marketing and consumer promotion. Administration, $7,500. Material supplies and services, $3,051,700. Professional services, $957,600. Salaries, $426,900. Travel and training, $6,200. Grants. Atlantic Canada Agreement on Tourism, $360,000. Total advertising and public relations, $4,809,900. Shall the section, Charlottetown Brighton.
I'm sorry, I had a similar question to material supplies and services, which seem to go up significantly. You would think you would spend less on material supplies and services in a year like this?
Yep. So in this section, this is where we do our media buys. So if the increase from 2021 to 2022, we're looking at doing more year-round advertising. So there's an increase there for a little bit of increased advertising for a year-round marketing campaign.
Charlottetown Brighton.
So this is like advanced spending, hoping to build up the next season again?
That would definitely be part of it, and it's to protect the great asset we have now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Charlottetown Brighton.
I'm okay.
You done? Thank you. Cornwall Meadowbank.
Well, I was going to ask a similar question on the 2.6 million, but 500,000 in 2021 for Destination Canada partnership. So Destination Canada didn't revoke their fee based on COVID-19?
So the 500,000 was money that we received from Destination Canada, and it was redistributed to the RTAs in order for them to do marketing. It was just in the 2020-2021 year.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
Yep.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. Under the professional services, so the forecast for this year is the same as forecast for last year. Is that because it's a multi-year contracts that you have for professional services, or is that just something that continuously carries over?
I know we do have multi-year contracts because for a lot of these things, creative services and those sorts of things, we go out and do an RFP for those. But I would have to go back and find out if that's why the budget remains.
Sure.
Mermaid Stratford.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Chair.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I appreciate the fact that it's difficult to plan for this coming season with all that's happening. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more what you are planning and what steps you're taking to make sure that 22 is going to be successful.
Well, that's going to be done in the strategic plan. One thing that we need to do is make sure we protect our valuable asset of tourism that we do have here. When the time is right, we are confident people are going to travel again, and we need to make sure that we have significant amount of marketing dollars to make sure that does happen. So I will make sure that I will be pushing the Finance Minister and the Premier hard to make sure that does happen.
Charlottetown Brighton?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Charlotte Section Carey? Media Relations Editorial, appropriations provided for editorial services and familiarization tour hosting. Administration, $5,200. Material supplies and services, $78,600. Professional services, $17,000. Salaries, $247,900. Travel and training, $6,200. Total media relations editorial, $354,900. Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. Just for all of the procurement of your advertising, media relations, etc., do you know what percentage of it is procured locally?
I wouldn't have that detail in front of me, no. I can go back and see what we can do.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you. It'd just be nice to know, how local businesses, are actually part of the tourism, and if we're giving any kind of prioritization to islanders that might have businesses that can actually do this work for us too. That'd be great. Thank you.
Charlotte Section Carey?
Carey.
Fulfillment, appropriations provided for media distribution. Administration, $101,900. Material supplies and services, $4,900. Professional services, $21,600. Salaries, $141,400. Travel and training, $4,200. Total fulfillment, $274,000. Charlottetown Brighton.
I was just wondering why the administration is varying so much up and down.
So this section is responsible for operating the distribution center. So this would be where we'd be mailing out our visitor guides and atlases and those sorts of things. There were a lot fewer requests in the last year, so we saved quite a bit of money on postage.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you, Chair.
Charlotte Section Carey? Publications, appropriations provided for the production and printing of publications, management of photo library and audio-visual services. Administration, $1,800. Material supplies and services, $191,200. Professional services, $44,200. Salaries, $159,700. Travel and training, $2,700. Total publications, $399,600. Charlotte Section Carey?
Carey.
Travel, trade sales, appropriations provided for the travel, trade, promotions, and international development. Administration, $15,500. Material supplies and services, $207,600. Salaries, $171,500. Travel and training, $7,700. Total travel, trade sales, $402,300. Charlottetown Brighton.
Well, I guess I was wondering why the material supplies and services is so relatively low compared to 322 in 2021.
In this section, this is where we would have staff would go to markets of interest and sit down with tour operators there. And we would also host tour operators on Prince Edward Island and provide them with sort of a sample of what PEI Tourism can offer. Because there was restricted travel last year, we had less expense in this area.
Charlottetown Brighton.
I'm good, thanks.
Charlotte Section Carey. Total tourism, marketing, communications, $7,984,200. Shall it carry? Total tourism, PEI, $22,362,300. Shall it carry?
Carry.
Oh, sorry. Transportation. Pardon? Oh, okay. I was looking for Stephen. I was getting ready. It was like referee. And you have someone to come onto the floor? Okay, honorable members, next we're going to move on to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and we'll begin on page 130. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Do you have something you want to say before you start, or? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for answered?
Director of Finance and Human Resources for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you.
So, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, Corporate Services. Appropriations provided for operation of the ministers' and deputy ministers' offices, support staff, and departmental centralized administrative management functions. Administration, $41,700. Equipment, $500. Material supplies and services, $11,300. Professional services, $1,500. Salaries, $567,000. Travel and training, $15,900. Total corporate services, $637,900. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. $25,976 for bridge fees for those who were denied entry. That was up till December 12th. Are there still vehicles being denied entry?
That doesn't fall under my department, but I would assume that there probably still is cars being turned back.
Summerside South Drive.
That would, Justice would have that information.
But no more funds were expended to cover these fees for people after December 12th?
That's correct.
Summerside South Drive.
Okay, so looking at the grants line, according to the handouts, page TI A4, the bulk of this went to the Telework Adoption Fund. Is this fund money for workers across government, or was it available to businesses and community groups?
So this was an adaptation fund for companies that were transitioning their staff or their employees to work from home that may not have had the technology. So there was a $2,500 grant offered to companies that applied for this program.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, so how effective was the program?
Well, I mean, we feel it was a great initiative to put in place to help island companies survive and to continue to operate in a safe manner by having their employees working from home rather than coming into an office when, I mean, you have to remember this whole pandemic, COVID-19 was new to everybody, and we were in step with other provinces and the federal government to ensure that our economy was still able to survive and that people were able to obtain the services that we're looking for.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, and on that note, effectively it kind of looks like we're going to be under COVID restrictions for this year as well. Why is this fund not being renewed for 2021-22?
Well, again, it was a program that was put in place to help companies that need to access this technology, and we feel at this point in time that the companies that did need to adjust to work from home, have their employees work from home, they were able to accomplish that. If you look back 11 months ago from right now and drove through Charlottetown, you'd be hard-pressed to find cars at parking meters or anywhere for that matter. But if you drive through Charlottetown or Summerside or various other communities here in PEI, businesses are open. A lot of staff have transitioned back into the workplace, but there are still certain sectors that they have their staff working from home.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, is it possible to receive a list of the companies that received telework assistance?
We can certainly look into that, and if it's available to bring back, we certainly will. Just need to make sure that.
Summerside South Drive.
That's good, Chair. Thank you.
Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Total corporate services, $637,900. Shall it carry? Infrastructure policy and planning. Infrastructure policy and planning, Appropriations provided for the delivery of various Canada Prince Edward Island infrastructure programs, as well as departmental policy and planning. Administration, $102,600. Equipment, $23,000. Material supplies and services, $15,700. Professional services, $605,000. Salaries, $1,231,300. Travel and training, $42,700. Grants, $98,418,600. Total infrastructure policy and planning, $100,438,900. Summerside South Drive.
Chair, there's $5,910 for a rural transit feasibility study. That sounds great. What were the results of that?
Chair?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So that study is still ongoing. We don't have the research completed on that yet. We expect to have that completed, I believe. It's scheduled to be finished by the end of June, and then we'll have a report.
Summerside South Drive.
Good. So when that report is available, is that something you can table for us?
I'd certainly, yeah, and be more than happy to share it with you.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, do we have any idea when we can expect to see rural transit start up here in Prince Edward Island? Is there a target date or anything we're working towards in that regard?
Well, again, a lot of it's going to be contingent on what this research and what this report tells us. I mean, I wouldn't want to give you a date or a time frame right now without knowing the results from the study and the information that has been gathered. But, you know, I mean, the study's looking at various things. It's looking at everything from fees to locations, size of transit vehicles. So there's a lot of aspects that we need to look at and consider here. But from the throne speech, from the budget, this government is very invested in looking at making this happen. I know the federal government also has initiatives here to help with rural transit, so we're lucky to have them as a partner on this as well.
Summerside South Drive.
That's very good. So in June sometime you said this report should be finalized. Is that correct?
That's the target right now, yes.
Yeah. So shortly after that, can we expect to see some action on getting rural transit set up? Is it as soon as possible after we have this information from the report kind of thing?
Well, again, until we have the research and the study details and know what it entails, that's then when we'll have to take it into the department and make decisions on how best to roll it out.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. There's an analysis of the outcomes and measurables for various funds for $37,359. Is there any such analysis of our net zero builds?
Sure. I wouldn't have that information here with me, but certainly as we move forward within infrastructure, all of our projects that we're doing are net zero ready, and we'll certainly endeavor to have an analysis done on every project that we're doing.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So when we're doing a net zero build, we don't have any projected outcomes and measurables that we could measure, like to gauge our success of the building against in the future? That's not, we're going to do that moving forward, but it's not there yet.
Well, I think the measurable is net zero.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So the measurable, how many buildings do you plan to get to net zero in any certain time frame? Is there any sort of measurables in that regard? Because I don't think we have any buildings that are net zero right now.
The new school that's going to be built in Sherwood is going to be net zero. The new mental health acute care facility at the campus where the Hillsborough Hospital currently is going to be net zero. Again, all of the new projects that you undertake are planned to be net zero, and that's the goal that we're going towards.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So perhaps you could tell me, Minister, what exactly net zero means when you're building the buildings.
So net zero essentially means, and I'm sorry, I just assumed that you would know this information, but net zero would be a building that is operational at a net zero level, so that it has the ability, it has the resources, it has the technology within the building to sustain itself within the power grid and everything else that it needs to be net zero, so that we're not producing carbon emissions, we're not producing GHGs, etc.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So those builds that you just listed are going to have everything incorporated within the building to produce all of their energy needs from clean energy? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That is our ultimate goal, that's correct.
Okay, Summerside South Drive. Do you have any more questions on this particular section? Because I can come back to you.
I do have a few more questions, yes.
Okay, so there's others on the list, and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Okay, Larry Inverness.
I guess, Minister, just notice on your under this section there, professional services, quite an increase in the budget there from 140,000 last year to a projected 605,000. Is there anything in particular that you've got that you're doing that would signify that amount of increase? You know, if I look at last year's list, it's a pretty innocuous list basically, but that's quite a bit of an increase.
Maybe I'll let you go on this, Wendy.
The increased budget in here is for the rural transit study that Minister just spoke of.
Okay, so it's a bigger study than the 5,900.
That, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Charlotte Brighton.
At last year's budget, there was an intriguing footnote about your department sponsoring a housing design competition. I was wondering what is happening with that.
Do you have any information? I'm sorry, Honourable Member, I don't have any information on that. I can certainly look into it and bring it back for you.
I would really like that.
Okay, Charlotte Brighton.
I believe you also have under your administration 70 to 80 acres of land out in Hillsborough. And I know some developers has expressed interest in the land. I was wondering what kind of planning are you doing with that piece of land?
Which piece of land are you referring to?
It's an unbuilt piece of the Hillsborough Park.
Of the Hillsborough Park?
Yeah.
Can you be more specific? The province owns a lot of land.
Well, that's probably the biggest and most valuable piece you actually have. It's the unbuilt section of Hillsborough Park. It's between 60 and 70 acres. I can't remember the exact amount. And I believe the center of it has been zoned for a school and other stuff.
Are you referring to the property that we own where the mental health campus is going?
No, this is in Hillsborough Park.
Okay, perhaps I can look into that and bring that back as well. If you had a PID number, that would be helpful.
Charlotte Brighton.
If you look at any plan of Hillsborough Park, you won't miss it. It's like a third of it.
Sure, we'll certainly look into that and bring that information back.
Okay, thank you.
Charlotte Brighton.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So back to net zero for a minute here, Minister. So as I understood it with the Sherwood School, it was going to be built with a lot of efficiencies and net zero ready components to it, but it wouldn't be generating any of its own energy on site. Has that plan changed?
Thanks, Chair. So as you're probably aware, it's still in the design phase, so we're still working towards that. It would be under capital projects, and this is within our operating budget.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. What is AER roll-up report?
Annual expenditure report. It's a report required by the federal government for the federal gas tax funding.
Summerside South Drive.
There's $12,500 for strategic transportation infrastructure review. Is this to determine which roads and bridges, et cetera, need work and in what priority?
Do you have that, Wendy?
That is a review. Work consisted of a review of the strategic transportation infrastructure. It's not of roads and bridges. It'd be throughout municipalities and throughout the province.
Summerside South Drive.
Throughout the unincorporated, I guess, not Summerside and Charlottetown?
Throughout the province.
The whole province.
Would have to.
Summerside South Drive.
Is the review public?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the results stand on that.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, Will you table it and any other reviews over the last 3 years?
We can certainly look at that and bring it back if it's possible, certainly.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So when would we know if it's possible or not, Minister?
Hope to have an answer tomorrow for you on that.
Thank you.
Summerside South Drive.
Is there any more info on the various bundles of roadwork completed? Like, what's in these bundles?
That's completed or that we're looking at moving forward on?
Both would be great.
Okay. So right now in our current planned construction year, where we do have the list identified. Right now, we do have some tenders out, RFPs out for work. And what's happening in the department right now is we're constantly going through the lists of identified projects that we feel that need to be done, that would brought forward either by municipalities or supervisors, road supervisors, and in some cases MLAs here in the House, et cetera, and we're going through our budget to see how best to get this work done and where it needs to be done. So we're close, but I mean, once we have a budget passed, I think we can get there a little bit quicker.
Summerside South Drive.
Can you explain the huge swings in the grants line?
Do you have that, Wendy?
Yes, I do. These are all based on approved projects through municipalities in partnership with the province. Due to COVID, there was some construction delays. For example, the wind farm was delayed, not necessarily, the wind farm was delayed, which is one of the major projects. The Summerside solar power grid had some delays in it. And the funding can only be applied or paid out once they make payments to their contractors. So due to the delays, we were not able to pay them out.
Summerside South Drive.
Is the government looking at modernizing the Expropriations Act?
That's not in here.
Pardon me?
That's not in this.
It's not in this section?
Oh, which section might it be in?
Land.
Land.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, can you explain where the province is in the process of developing a land bank? Is that still within transportation?
It's right now being discussed between several departments. We're certainly taking a leadership role on it, and it's something that we feel very strongly about, that a land bank would be very beneficial here on PEI.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, and has there been any movement? I mean, that's the position we've kind of had for a while here now. Has there been any movement at all on the land bank? I know we've had a study completed. Is that being incorporated into this process, or is there a new study in development?
Yeah, so Honourable Member, we have a consultant that's been doing some work on it. Since I've come into this chair, I've had several meetings with the consultant to look at the work and preliminary recommendations. Are we there yet? No. Is there work being done? Yeah, there's important work being done towards the land bank. What department ultimately will reside in, I'm not sure. I know the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land is also quite keen on it. But it's an initiative that we feel very strongly about, and we think it's important to move forward on.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Can you elaborate on the gender lens on procurement for TIE? Oh, I guess TI now.
Do you have that information, Wendy? Which specific part? There's multiple components. Harassment in the workplace, improving diversity and inclusion and driver's licenses, diversity in the workforce.
All of it, Minister.
Yeah, if you'd like, I could table this document.
That'd be great.
Yeah, certainly.
Summerside South Drive.
I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Make sure we get that tabled.
I would like to go back to the Plant Net Zero School. I found the minister's answer very vague. Either you tell the architect to design the school to net zero standards, including collectors, or you don't. Which is it in this case?
Thanks, Chair. We are moving forward with Net Zero Ready, and so any design work on new projects will be built towards that initiative. And so the instructions to the architects, the designers, will be to design it towards net zero.
Charlottetown Brighton?
You're using the word net zero and net zero ready interchangeable. They're two completely different things. One is the building, the other one is the collection system. So if I hear you correctly, it's going to be net zero ready, which means a net zero building without the collectors. Is that what you're saying?
What we're building towards right now is net zero ready, so that when we have everything in place, we can be net zero.
Charlottetown Brighton?
Okay, so you're not putting the collectors on at this time. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to just ask a couple questions around the roadwork bundles, and the roads that have been approved. So, has that been made public yet, the list of roads that are in the plan for this upcoming season?
No, it hasn't been made public yet. It's difficult to make it public when we don't have a budget approved.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. But it's hard to approve the budget if you don't know the roads that are in the plan. It's kind of chicken egg, right?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you there. I mean, there's lots of requests that have come in. We need to prioritize them. We need to look at which roads need the work more than others. We're looking at, I mean, Honourable Member, you know yourself that you recently received an email that I did as well with regards to the Bunbury Road and widening the shoulders there. Are we going to get to that one this year? I would say no. But for your district, I can tell you that we have a plan to do 8 kilometres of shoulder widening on the Pownell Road, which is a well-travelled road.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mermaid Stratford?
I'd love to be able to do everything
Chair.
in 1 year, but it's not feasible.
And I'm not that.
I'm not like the past minister.
Mermaid Stratford, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And that wasn't really my question.
Yeah.
My question is you have an envelope of money that you're requesting us to approve, an
Yep.
appropriation that you're requesting us to approve. And normally it would be good to see the backup to see if that's how it's being distributed. Understanding what the roads are and where they are would be part of the backup in order to approve that appropriation, right? That's typically, why you would ask for a certain envelope of money, because
Yep.
you have this list that you need to do, because that's what's been prioritized from the road supervisors. So
Yep.
do you have a list that can be made to the public or that you can table tomorrow?
We have a list, but it's not something that we can table at this time, Honourable Member. As I said, I guess to go back a little more historically, typically what we try to do is 100 kilometres every year to maintain the status quo on the roads. We were able to do, I think, an additional, last year I think it was budgeted for 108 kilometres. The minister at the time managed to secure some additional funding, and we ended up doing, I believe it was 158 kilometres, 137 kilometres was recap, and 21 kilometres was actually paving of dirt roads or gravel roads. So again, it'd be next to impossible for me to give you specific roads here today or here tomorrow. Our Director of Highway Maintenance about 2 weeks ago did an interview, I think, with CBC, and they were asking him how the road breakup was this season, and he said, you know what, this year's pretty average. It's not too bad. If you asked him 3 days later, he said, I regretted saying that, because within a 2 or 3 day period, the conditions changed so drastically that we had a lot more road breakup than we were anticipating. So we're always evaluating that. The road supervisors are still calling in with different areas that need to be done. The Oysterbed Bridge is a perfect example. The detour that was done there on the Church Road and the Stead Road, I received some complaints. I went out and took a look. I was astonished at the condition of those roads. Were they originally in the budget to do? I don't believe so. Are they going to have to be done? Most definitely.
Okay, Honourable Minister, we are now going to transition over to opposition time, so I'll ask you to adjourn debate on this.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Shall carry?
Carried. Thanks, Wendy.
You're welcome. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the grant of supply to Her Majesty, I beg leave to report that the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the 20th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 20, Election Age Act, Bill number 100, in committee.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Charlottetown Victoria Park, that this House do now resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
House now in Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration bill to be intituled Election Age Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Honourable members, the bill, we have opened it up to just general questions, and it is still under debate. Would you please state your name and position for Hansard?
Sure. I'm Nathan Hood, Senior Policy Advisor to the Official Opposition.
Thank you and good afternoon. Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks, member. You got your bill back on the floor again here, and I just wanted to first of all to comment that much like the member from Kensington Malpeque, I initially was said, you know, this is a very progressive bill. You know, I talked to my daughter and her friends. My daughter's 14 and her friends are the same age. I talked to my son who's 11, maybe a little young, and some others. And I thought, you know, in general, this, you know, there's probably, you know, a lot of support for this, you know, lowering the voting age. Then I went out and I started talking to the the wider community. And I was quite frankly surprised at the opposition to it. And so I really had to rethink my position, representing my constituents. And because I understand where you're going with this, and I understand why you're doing it. I mean, having a 14-year-old daughter who's very engaged, and in fact, the education system has at least done her class well at Gulf Shore School. I mean, they did a whole unit on the political system on Prince Edward Island and all the different levels of government. And so I would feel comfortable that they at least have the knowledge to make an informed decision. But now I have to take into account whether the electoral body as a whole, my constituents, are ready to go that direction. And it's a really tough decision for me on how to vote on this bill. Because as you've mentioned, sometimes you have to lead the way, and you have to show people where to go, because it's sort of the right thing to do, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I have to respect the views of my constituents and represent the views of my constituents. So that said, you've referred before to how you did consultation with a variety of groups based on the motion that the Minister of Finance and I had tabled in the last session, and that you tried to cover off all those groups in consultation. I mean, the wording of the motion was, but not limited to, so you also went beyond. But the title of the motion was referring Bill 122 to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Development. That was the number of the bill previously. So I was wondering, at the end of the day, I mean, obviously you were trying to take that motion into account, and, in our collaborative relationship here, why you didn't actually take the bill and send it to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Development, which of course you chair.
Chair, could I ask the Minister a clarification question?
Sure.
Whenever you, I'll address your question, I just have, whenever you say that you consulted the wider community, was that adults or was that youth?
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So what I do is when I'm out and about and talking with people, both adults and youth, I ask them about various issues that are on the table, this being one of them. I also use social media, and probably in the social media it would be mostly adults that would have responded there. But even amongst the youth, some were saying, it wasn't 100%, yes, we need this, this is absolutely something we have to have. It was really, I found it was probably, the old Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. I was sort of finding that about 80% of my constituents were saying, I don't think we're ready to move ahead with lowering the voting age. That's what it kind of came out to. And it was kind of anecdotal as well. This was not a scientific, survey that I did of my constituents. This was me, as the MLA speaking with constituents.
Thank you, Chair. And just a couple of things on that. It's great to hear that your daughter's having an engaging experience with civics education. Yeah. And I think that would really depend on the teacher's interest and the teacher's comfort level. That would really determine that experience, because our curriculum could use some work in that area. So that's the first thing I'll say. And the second thing is for the motion to send it to committee, that was a motion that came from government. That wasn't something that came from us. In the nature of being collaborative, that's why we took all of the steps. And we really did not feel it necessary to send it to committee in the sense, of course, those conversations are always important and good to have. And the way that we looked at it is this piece of legislation is a little bit different than your regular piece of legislation in that we're looking at extending a right. And so in our mind is you consult, you ask about any possible impacts on organizations. You keep in mind the work that will come from extending this right. The first step to that is extending the right and then doing the work. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and I think it's kind of relevant here, and in terms of, not being and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but not being fearful of the work that it might involve or how much time it might take, those sorts of things. And so one of the things we know is that we'll need to register our new voters if we decide to extend this right. And so we were talking about I forget the name of the campaign under the former government about the return home, where they were encouraging Islanders to return home, they'd pay for the plane ticket. And we were kind of giggled saying like, oh, but what if we can't do that because then we'd have to register them as voters potentially. And so we're just kind of joking back and forth a little bit about it. But with the point being that we extend the right first and we've heard what the work is. And so then we take that next step to do the work that's necessary to go with this legislation. This legislation doesn't necessarily automatically mean, that like it's extending the right first and then the work.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thanks, Chair, and I think I see what you're saying. I mean, I would feel much more comfortable if we kind of knew all of those downstream implications and had considered them, for example, at committee, which is the structure we have set up that normally to look at these sort of things. I would feel more comfortable if we'd done that before we enshrine the right. I mean, in our motion, we talked about it being of monumental and substantive significance, right? And I really think it is. I mean, this is a major thing, right? And so we want to make sure we explore it thoroughly and all the implications of it. So. My second question, and sort of related to that, is during the last time the bill was on the floor for debate, I'd asked about the School Act and specifically the French language school board elections, because in the School Act it's very clear that the eligibility to vote in the school board elections requires Canadian citizens who are at least 18 years of age on the day of the election and have been resident in the province for at least 6 months, etc. So that 18 years of age is also in the School Act. So that would definitely be one of the implications that you talk about. And I was wondering, I was looking at the document you got back from the Commission. It's called Aide de langue française, and I was reading it in French, so I might have missed it, but did they actually address this issue about the school board and the voting age of 18?
As far as my memory serves, no. Nate, are you looking for that?
Yeah, I might have it.
Actually, I do have it. And while I'm looking for it, you mentioned collaboration earlier. In the spirit of collaboration, I reached out several times about this very thing. And, it would have been nice to hear this back in January, just to that point.
En français.
Oui.
C'est difficile pour moi.
They did not mention that.
Okay. Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you. And so, Chair, I mean, I did bring that up already during the last debate when this was on the floor, so I assumed you would have addressed it. But no, thank you. That's exactly the sort of implication that is one of the reasons that you need to really dig into this and have broad engagement of stakeholders. As per our motion, that's all the questions I have, Chair. But thanks.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Chair. So to the best of my recollection, the last time you were on floor with your bill, you had indicated that you had heard from the Federation of Municipalities. Mm-hmm. Did you hear from any municipalities on their own behalf?
Sorry, Chair.
Go ahead.
I had a couple of informal conversations of people who had reached out to me after because they had done, when I'd reached out to them initially, they were saying that they had a meeting and that they would bring it up there. And then I encouraged them to let the municipalities know, give them my contact information to reach out. I did have a couple reach out, asking for further clarification on a couple of things.
Okay. And you would
Leader of the third party.
And also to my recollection, you had indicated that you had reached out to some people and only so many had reached back to you. Do you have those numbers with you today? And I'm sorry to be repetitive,
No,
but I'm just
that's
kind of
okay.
curious how many people responded back.
I can't remember where I have that.
I can probably go through my recollection. Elections PEI, we heard from them. We reached out to all of the student councils across the province and received input from 3, as well as some staff members from the high schools also offered input. We heard back from Commission Scolaire Langue Française, Public Schools Branch, Young Voters of PEI, Coalition for Women in Government, Own the Way. Basically, we heard back from everyone who we reached out to, except for all of the student councils. There were just 3 student councils.
How many student councils would there be?
There are, how many high schools?
7. I think 7.
7?
Yeah.
Is there 7? So like, I should know this.
High schools across the province, like, and
9?
student count, there'd be more than 9, wouldn't there? There's only 9 high schools?
How many? 12.
12.
Yeah. And at the time, and also to that point, there was, what I tabled today was consultation done across the province by an individual with youth, as well as the other document that I tabled that was specifically consultation done with youth across Canada. And where we didn't have, because of our sheer numbers, the young man who took that other additional consultation on, took that on because he wanted to make sure that the voices of PEI were reflected as well.
Okay.
And leader of the third party?
To the minister's question there, just to piggyback on it, where he said about the school board. So municipalities are the same way. It says you must be 18 years of age. So how would this all get changed? Like, how long would it take to change this? Would it be a slow process, or could it be changed right after this would be passed? Like, how would you go about that? Like,
So I think just to clarify with the school boards, my recollection, and I'd have to go back, is that the criteria for being able to vote in those elections is determined by the regs, not the act. So my understanding is that an order in council could address those issues with criteria. As far as how to implement it, once the bill becomes law, you would be able to register these voters. So Elections PEI could begin the process of engaging with those young islanders and getting them registered to vote.
Leader of the third party.
so the municipalities wouldn't have to do anything? They'd just vote from Elections PEI? Is that what you're
So,
telling me?
yeah, most municipalities on PEI have information sharing agreements with Elections PEI for the purpose of conducting elections. And Elections PEI would already have the list of eligible electors. And so if a municipality required that list for their own purposes for a municipal election, they could enter into an agreement with Elections PEI to obtain that information.
Leader of the third party.
But they would have to update that information if you're adding 16-year-olds. Like, they'd have it now, people over 18 that are eligible to vote in a municipality, but they wouldn't have the ones that are 16 years old.
Do you mean with respect to municipalities?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and that's where Elections PEI would already be collecting that information at a provincial level, and if municipalities required that information, they could enter into an agreement with Elections PEI to obtain that information.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for now, Chair.
You're welcome. Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Chair. Have you, along the way, did you ever, this seems like a very big topic, and did you guys ever consider looking at a plebiscite attached with a question to 2 islanders about what they feel is necessary, what they want to do attached to the next provincial election?
I can answer that. The answer is no. And in the history of Canada, there has never been a plebiscite or a referendum around expanding the franchise to any group in Canada. So when we considered lowering the voting age at the federal level or at a provincial level, when we considered expanding the right to vote to Indigenous peoples in Canada, certain religious minorities, there was never a referendum or plebiscite to do that. It was always the Legislative Assembly or Parliament that made that decision. And I think that's probably the appropriate place, because if you look at the history of our country and our provinces, certainly a big reason why these groups have never had the right to vote is for discriminatory reasons, right? And so putting someone's right to vote as a question of public opinion is obviously, I think, a bit troubling, because it would be a way for the public to disenfranchise certain members of society. And I don't think that would be a desirable goal with any kind of legislation or plebiscite or referendum.
Charlottetown West Royalty?
Yeah, and along that is that, I guess, as a legislator, you go into your district, you ask the questions, and it's surprising to hear what people have to say. Like, they're very much split on it. So I guess I'm just asking, like, how we can develop more sense from people, or the people that we represent, what they think. But I want to ask too, did you consult with the Black Cultural Society on this?
No, that was not one of the groups that we engaged.
Charlottetown West Royalty?
Why not? Or did you, or anybody?
To be honest, I don't really, it was kind of, we went by the list that was given, and that was kind of,
yeah.
You know, we didn't really, and we, as groups would pop up, we would, but that was kind of the list that we went with.
Yeah.
Charlottetown West Royalty?
And the reason why I ask, and somebody just asked why, is because they have a sense of, in Prince Edward Island, we have been trying to get people to immigrate to Prince Edward Island and stay. And I understand that we all do it. We go door to door, we see people, go to houses, and they can't vote. And they've got kids in school, they've been here for a while, everything is absolutely perfect. Now we're talking about those same kids, friends will be able to vote, but they'll go into school and it's right in front of them and they won't be able to vote. So I'm worried about the minorities again. I'm worried about the people who can't vote in Prince Edward Island based on federal legislation or whatever, but now it's in front of them. Now they don't become included in that process. And that's what I was looking at. I just wanted to get a sense of what you thought about that.
Well, I think that, you know, that's the federal law. Canadian citizens have the right to vote, and, you know, unless we change that, like, let's change that, you know, if that's, so it doesn't, I think that that's the same as adults witnessing it and children witnessing it, you know, like, I think that it's, you know, that's just, you know, the way that our electoral system is set up right now.
Yeah, and I'm just worried, sorry, Chair. I'm just worried about bringing it to them and having that. I mean, right now, in the process of the school education, when they're doing their voting stuff, everybody participates. It's everybody gets involved. You bring everybody into it. And it's a joyous occasion. Now it becomes a little bit more serious at a very young age, and there'll be people that will be excluded, and I'm worried about those people in the school system. So that's, yeah.
And I would think that would provide a great opportunity for learning, and what a wonderful opportunity to engage them when they're young, to say, this is what Canada says, this is what PEI says is our voting rights. And so that opens up conversations. I think that could be a potential for tremendous growth, and perhaps an opportunity for people to start advocating at a younger age where they see inequities in our democracy and in our voting systems. I think that by putting this in schools and starting those conversations in a really genuine way, because they actually get to vote, people who are eligible, that it provides an opportunity on so many different levels, and this is one that I hadn't even considered. So an opportunity for growth, to look at inequities on a deeper level, because this is going to open up a whole bunch of conversations that may have been happening before, but our youth didn't have any connection to them, but now they will. And so for a young voter who may not even understand, you know, coming to Canada, may not understand what it means to be a voter here, and how do they, you know, how can they become a voter? I think that starts those conversations earlier, which I think is an even stronger argument for, really, in my mind.
Yeah.
Charlottetown West Royalty?
And I just add that I feel a little bit, I'm just a little bit nervous about that. And I've been nervous about that for a while because I can see your point, but I also see the point of that we have issues in the school system with differences amongst islanders. And I just don't know if this would enhance or further divide that. So those are my concerns. So it's just comments. Thanks. I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Leader of the third party.
Thanks, Chair. So, just for clarity, if this bill was to pass here, and someone said it this morning on the radio, there could be a federal election this year, so they'd be able to vote here with no election, but they couldn't vote in the federal election, correct?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't hear all that.
That would be correct. The federal voting age would be set by the federal government, and we would set any provincial or municipal voting ages within our jurisdiction.
Leader of the third party.
How many other provinces, is there any other province, did you fellows say that the age is reduced?
We would be the first if it went to 16. And we were actually the first to use a voting age of 16 with our plebiscite in 2016.
Leader of the third party.
Okay. So that's just kind of a concern, because if they could vote provincially and then they couldn't vote federally, it could be a long time before that happens.
Conversations are happening at every single level, and really and truly, 16-year-olds will win the right to vote. It's just a matter of when. It's happening, there's discussions happening in almost every single province. It's happening at the federal level. It's happening in the Senate. It is going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Leader of the third party.
That's it for now. Thanks, Chair.
Any other questions? I have a few questions. First I'm going to start with a statement on it. I've done a considerable amount of consultation within my district on this, whether it was through social media, going out to groups within my district, municipalities, organizations. I am privileged to represent them in this House. So I took all of that input, and I'll make a decision based on what my constituents want me to vote on in this particular case. So with that said, I just have a couple of questions, and it goes back to a statement you made in the House earlier, I think it was last week, and I'm just wondering, a couple of questions for you. So do you allow for any disagreement on this subject before us?
Absolutely, and I do apologize if people took personal offense to that. That was not my intent. So for me, as I mentioned a bit earlier today, this is about, we've kind of moved past the, are they mature enough to vote? Are they capable to vote? We've moved past that conversation. And so now it's like, it's about, are we going to extend this right? And so what I was trying to make clear is that all of the things that we discuss in here are valuable, and I've made notes of all of them because it's important that we know what extending this franchise means to us as legislators and what it's going to mean to the community organizations who are directly impacted by this. And so in saying that, it's a matter of not getting caught up in the things that we don't have control over. To look and acknowledge at what work's going to need to be done, but let's not get so hyper-focused on the kind of the nitty-gritties that we skip over what we're really trying to do here. And that's all that I meant by that.
Okay, because I did take offense to that, and I took offense to even some of the comments you made, even today, about collaboration and, that you asked, or why didn't people bring this up to you before? Well, the floor of this House is where we should be debating, not behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. So, we have an obligation to the public to let them know what we are debating, what stand we take, and they can come after us, and they can judge us whether we stand for what they believe in or not. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, what you said in the House that day, and I'm going to quote you, it's our job as legislators to uphold our democracy, to strengthen it, and to expand it. If we aren't up to that task, perhaps we should reconsider our place in this House. So basically, I'm just wondering, where do you get the moral certainty to say that anyone who disagrees with you should leave this House?
Well, and that's a very general statement. Mm-hmm. Do you disagree? If you took the context out, if you took out 16-year-olds, do you disagree with that statement?
I'm asking you that question.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So if you take out 16-year-olds. I meant that in the most general of senses. And I reread that statement afterwards because I realized after hearing some feedback from that, I thought, okay, there's nothing in this that is untrue. I think all of us as legislators could stand behind what our job is. Yeah, so and as for the collaboration, I really appreciate that statement because I've been back and forth about that a lot because, yes, our job is to have discussions in here and debate things. And so with me sending emails and trying to have some of those conversations so we could get wrinkles ironed out, it's not seen publicly when we do it like that. And I was hoping that in the collaborative spirit and my full intent, whether I expressed it well, whether I was believed and taken at face value, was that I wanted to give everyone the credit for the behind the scenes work. I was prepared to talk about that and work that out on the floor so that it was just a matter of getting the work done so that we weren't spending so much time on this. I was kind of hoping to do a lot of the work kind of outside of the House with conversations, but I had 100% pure intentions of making it known that this was, I see this is not a partisan thing. To me, this is all of us working together to do something really exciting. And that's how I look at it. I'm very excited about it. I've worked with kids my whole entire life. And so I do apologize if that was taken out of context or if it came across improperly.
Okay, and my decision today will not be based on anything partisan either. I was elected to represent all of my district, and I will represent them today or whenever it is that we get a chance to vote on this bill. So going back to that again, I just want to I believe that that disclosure and honest debate have a place here in this House. And I believe that disagreement is possible, in my version of democratic belief. So I just want to make sure that it's out there, because I didn't take what you said that day to what you're telling me today. So I took offense to that. So I wanted to put that out there. I don't have any other questions on my list. So shall this bill carry?
No.
Okay. Let me grab this. Okay. It was very clear to me that there was no's. I didn't even hear any yeas, but I will ask again, all right?
I'll take them out.
Yeah. Shall this bill carry?
Yes.
Okay. So I clearly heard more no's, but I will ask for a show of hands. So all those saying no to carrying this bill, please raise your hand. All those saying yes to carrying this bill, please raise your hand. Okay, so it's clear that the noes have it. So the bill will not carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill not recommended.
Shall it carry? Carry. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be entitled Election Age Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and does not recommend same to the Legislative Assembly. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Honourable members, there being a standing vote requested, sirs of arms, you may ring the bell.
I sign it.
Speaker, the opposition is ready for the vote.
Speaker, the third party is ready for the vote.
Government is ready for the vote.
Honourable members, those voting against the report of the committee, please stand.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The member for Mermaid Stratford. The member for Morel Donut. The member for O'Leary Inverness. The member for Summerside South Drive. The member for Charlottetown Victoria Park. The member for Charlottetown Brighton. The member for Tyne Valley Sherbrooke. The member for Summerside Wilmot. The member for Charlottetown Belvedere.
Honourable members, those voting for the report of the committee, please stand.
The member for Charlottetown Winslow. The member for Tignish Palmer Road. The Minister of Fisheries and Communities. The Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier. The Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. The Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. The Minister of Agriculture and Land and Minister of Justice and Public Safety. The Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. The Minister of Social Development and Housing. The Minister of Health and Wellness. The member for Montague Kilmuir. The member for Cornwall Meadowbank. The Leader of the Third Party. The member for Charlottetown West Royalty.
Didn't change the outcomes, but okay. The report of the committee has been adopted. Next on the agenda, private members. The honourable member from Morel, Donut, and the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that motion 32 be now read.
Shall carry?
Mr. Speaker, motion 32 is under debate, and debate was adjourned by the honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was kind of just wrapping up the last time, so my remarks will be brief. But as I mentioned before, I think that a really crucial piece of the work that we do, that anyone does when they're working with children or youth, is to recognize that they are a part of a familial system. And so any work that you're doing with them, when you send them home, you have to always be thinking about what they might be going home to. And so ensuring that their safety and health is always at the center of everything you do. So on that note, I would just really like to thank the Student Wellbeing Team for the work that they do every single day. This early intervention and prevention work will have positive ripple effects into the future if we continue and further support the work that they do for island students and their families. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, is there anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? I exhausted my list. If not, we'll go back to the mover of the motion, the honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I do want to thank all the members who did stand and spoke to this motion, Mr. Speaker. Again, I do think that for the most part, everyone that did speak, from the Minister of Education, as well as the Minister of Justice, the seconder of the motion, and the member across, all agreed that, you know, the great work that is done by the student well-being teams, and also the amount of work, the familial system, I believe the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park mentioned, and again, encouraging government to make sure that the parental supports are in place for these families. across PEI that rely on the student well-being teams. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will end debate.
Is anybody a seconder for that?
Seconded by the member from Morell-Donagh.
No, I don't think. Sorry. Call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please stand. What? Oh. Honourable members, standing vote's been requested. Sergeant Arms, may I ring the bell?
Everyone should be recorded.
Opposition is ready for the vote.
Party is also ready for the vote, Mr. Speaker. Government is ready for the vote, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, those voting against the motion, please stand. All those in favor of the motion, please stand.
The member for Charlottetown Winslow. The Minister of Fisheries and Communities. The Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier. The Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. The Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. The Minister of Agriculture and Land and Minister of Justice and Public Safety. The Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. The Minister of Social Development and Housing. The Minister of Health and Wellness. The member for Montague-Kilmuir. The member for Cornwall-Meadowbank. The Leader of the Third Party. The Leader of the Opposition. The member for Mermaid Stratford. The member for Morell-Donagh. The member for Charlottetown West Royalty. The member for O'Leary Inverness. The member for Summerside South Drive. The member for Charlottetown Victoria Park. The member for Charlottetown Brighton. The member for Pine Valley Sherbrooke. The member for Summerside Wilmot. And the member for Charlottetown Belvedere.
Honourable members, your motion passed unanimously. The honourable member from Morell-Donagh and the Government House Leader.
Motion is motion 4. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that motion number 4 be now called.
Shall I carry?
Motion number 4. The honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow moves, seconded by the honourable member from Morell-Donagh, the following motion. Whereas since 1976, the province of Prince Edward Island has been a shareholder in the Atlantic Lottery Corporation, which offers regulated gaming products in the province. And whereas the proceeds from gaming help fund the delivery of essential public services for islanders, including mental health and addiction services. And whereas the province first introduced a responsible gaming strategy in 2008, and whereas the province's responsible gaming strategy has not been updated since 2008, and whereas there have been significant developments in gaming technology, harm reduction, and responsible gaming practices since 2008. Therefore, be it resolved that this Assembly urge the province to update its responsible gaming strategy at its earliest convenience.
I'll call on Charlottetown Winslow to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall-Meadowbanks.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask for clarification on this motion. Earlier during the sitting, the House passed a motion number 2, which urged government to release an updated responsible gaming strategy within 6 months. The motion that has now been called urges the province to update its responsible gaming strategy at its earliest convenience. First, the motion waters down the direction agreed to by the House by talking about government convenience. Second, the matter has already been decided based on our research. An old rule of Parliament reads that a question being once made and carried in the affirmative or negative cannot be questioned again, but must stand as the judgment of the House. Therefore, I am asking the Speaker to clarify whether motion number 4 is pale duplication of a decision already made and whether it is admissible for debate.
Honourable member, you'll call on point of order, or just a clarification?
Point of order.
Point of order? Recess. Honourable members, I have considered the point of order raised by the member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, and I'm prepared to rule. Rule 35.2 states that no member shall reflect upon any vote of the House. This rule supports the motion that the matter that had been decided by the House shall not be questioned again during the same session and stand as decided. This includes bills, motions, or other resolutions carried in either the affirmative or negative. This is supported by Busain's citation 558. Upon comparison of motion 4, updating the responsible gaming strategy, and motion 2, calling on government to increase gambling addiction supports, which was decided on March 10th. In the affirmative I find that motion 4 contains one of the same matters as decided in motion 2. I will read operative clauses for each motion for comparison. In the third operative clause of motion 2, therefore, be it further resolved, the Legislative Assembly urged government to release an updated responsible gaming strategy within 6 months of this motion passage. In the final operative clause of motion 4, therefore, be it resolved that this Assembly urge the province to update its responsible gaming strategy at its earliest convenience. As you can see, honourable members, allowing the House to debate this motion, which is regarding a matter that has already been decided, is out of order. Thank you. Honourable members, the hour has been called. The Honourable Member from Morel, Donagh, and the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Cornwall Meadowbank, that this House adjourn until April 21st at 1 o'clock in the PM.
Shall it carry?